There are moments in Earth's history that don't feel like science. They feel like a threat. We like to think big changes happen slowly. We imagine centuries passing, then generations, then maybe millennia. Glaciers are supposed to advance over ages. Warmth should fade gradually. Forests shouldn't die in a single season. Humans usually have time to adapt, to migrate, or to come up with something new. The Younger Dryas breaks that logic completely. About 12,900 years ago, it was like someone grabbed a giant invisible lever and yanked it. The planet was already thawing. The ice was retreating. Warmth was returning. It felt like the worst was over. Then, without warning, the world plunged back into the deep freeze. This wasn't a minor dip or a symbolic correction. It slammed back hard. It slammed into the landscape, the animals and the people who were already living on the edge of survival. People who couldn't afford a single mistake. Don't think of this as a line on a textbook graph. Think of it as a physical sensation. You wake up, step outside, and realize the world has become harsher. The ground is harder. The wind cuts deeper. Food is suddenly unreliable. Every journey is longer, and every mistake is more expensive. But the worst part wasn't just the cold. It was the fact that it arrived exactly when people had stopped expecting it. And that is what's truly terrifying. Nature wasn't the only thing that took a hit. Humans did too. In North America, the Clovis culture suddenly vanishes from the archaeological record around 12,800 years ago. For a long time, their footprints were everywhere. Those distinct spearheads, their campsites, their specific tools. Then, the line just stops. It's so abrupt that an archaeologist digging through the layers can practically feel the break with their hands. One world was there, and then it wasn't. In its place, something else emerges. Different tools, a different lifestyle, a different way of hunting and moving. Which raises a pretty haunting question. What actually happened to the Clovis people? Did they die out? Did they scatter? Did they vanish into other groups? Or did they adapt so fast that we can't even recognize them anymore? At this point, history stops being a dry chart. We aren't talking about cultures on paper. We're talking about families who never returned to their usual campsites. We're talking about children whose traditional food sources simply disappeared. These were people who knew exactly where the herds would be and when the ice would melt. Then they woke up to find that the world no longer followed the calendar they knew. This wasn't just a local event. You see the same scars in Europe. Campsites were abandoned, populations plummeted. The tool sets changed too quickly. Usually, when archaeologists see these shifts, they look for a slow evolution, a logical chain of events. But this was different. This wasn't growth, it was a breaking point. It was as if life became so brutal that the old ways of living lost their meaning overnight. Picture a small group of people huddled around a fire. The air is biting. Supplies are disappearing faster than they should. The animals aren't using the old trails. The water isn't behaving like it did in years past. The elders are arguing. The young people are watching in silence. Someone suggests waiting. Someone else says they have to head south. They have to follow the herds while they still have the strength to walk.
This is how massive climate events enter human history, not as a fancy term, but as a series of desperate choices with no good options. In the Middle East, the picture is just as grim. Early attempts at farming were cut short. People who had started to settle down were forced back to a nomadic life of hunting and gathering. This is a massive red flag. You don't start farming because you're bored. It requires time, stability, and a basic trust in tomorrow. You need to know that the seeds you put in the ground won't be punished by a sudden climate collapse. During the Younger Dryas, the very idea of long-term planning became fragile. The world was telling them, survive the next season first, then we'll talk about the future. The most frustrating part, the planet had already started to warm up. The Ice Age was losing its grip. If you were looking at the data back then, you'd have thought the hard times were over. But they weren't. It wasn't until the Younger Dryas finally ended around 11,700 years ago that temperatures spiked again, and it happened almost as fast as the initial crash.
Only then did the Neolithic revolution truly find its footing. Before that, there were centuries of bitter cold, food shortages, and cultural resets. For thousands of years, it must have felt like that brief period of warmth was a lie, and that the Earth's natural state was meant to be frozen, cruel, and hostile. And here's the really unsettling part. The Younger Dryas is like a grim reminder: don't take warming for granted. Our planet is capable of sudden shifts, violent shifts, and they often hit right when everyone has finally started to relax. Eventually, temperatures spiked again, glaciers retreated, and life began to claw its way back, but it returned to a different world. The species that vanished didn't reappear. The people who died stayed dead. The cultural lineages that snapped were gone forever. That's why the Younger Dryas isn't just some ancient climate episode, it's a warning. Earth's climate can change in a heartbeat, abruptly, instantly, and without a long, polite heads up. So, the big question, what actually triggered this collapse? Why did a world that was finally thawing out suddenly plunge back into the deep freeze? For a long time, the leading theory focused on one of the most vital systems on Earth. Scientists call it the Atlantic circulation, basically a giant ocean current system that goes by many names: the thermohaline circulation, the meridional overturning circulation, the great ocean conveyor. The concept is simple. The ocean moves heat on a scale that's honestly hard to wrap your head around. Ocean currents aren't just water moving from point A to point B. It's a massive conveyor belt distributing heat from the equator to the poles. The Gulf Stream carries warm water from the Caribbean across the North Atlantic toward Europe. That's the only reason Europe is way warmer than it should be at that latitude. London is roughly at the same latitude as Labrador, Canada, but the two places feel like different planets. If you've ever stood in a damp European wind and thought it was miserable, imagine what that air would feel like without a giant oceanic system hauling heat to those shores for centuries. The whole thing runs on water density. Warm, salty water moves north. There it cools down, becomes denser, and sinks to the bottom before heading back south along the ocean floor. It's a colossal system, slow but incredibly powerful. You can't see it from the shore, but it decides the fate of entire continents.
It basically acts like a giant heat pump for the planet. If this conveyor stops, the consequences aren't just academic, they're immediate and brutal. What stops it? Fresh water. If a massive amount of fresh water suddenly dumps into the North Atlantic, it dilutes the salt, lowers the density, and the water stops sinking. If it doesn't sink, the conveyor breaks. It weakens, slows, and in the worst-case scenario, it just stops. It sounds like a dry, technical mechanism, but look at it this way. Think of a giant invisible engine that's been heating Europe for ages, and suddenly it chokes on meltwater.
Winters in London start looking like winters in Labrador. You walk outside in the morning and the air cuts your face like the city moved 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers north overnight. Fields that grew wheat last fall are black and empty by spring. Rivers that usually thaw in March stay locked under ice until May. That's the price of a broken conveyor. It all sounds terrifyingly logical. That's why this theory was the favorite for so long. And the follow-up question has a fascinating answer. Where would all that fresh water come from at once? The answer lies in the ice sheets. Massive glaciers used to cover North America. One of them, the Laurentide ice sheet, was an absolute monster. I'm not being poetic, it was terrifyingly huge. A white mass stretching for thousands of miles, crushing the continent under its own weight. Meltwater pooled at its southern edge, forming giant lakes. The most famous was Lake Agassiz. To give you an idea of the scale, it was roughly the size of the Black Sea. Even that description sounds like a warning. A lake the size of a sea, held back by a wall of ice. Cold, pressure, a massive volume of water held back by a barrier that looks permanent until it cracks. According to the classic version, about 12,900 years ago, that ice wall gave way. It snapped. In just a few days, maybe weeks, a staggering amount of fresh water surged into the North Atlantic. It was enough to knock the entire oceanic conveyor off its tracks. The scene is pure cinema. First the crack, then the roar, then a wall of water that doesn't just flow, it destroys everything in its path.
An ice dam holding back an inland sea fails. A surge of water reshapes the landscape, gouges out bedrock, moves riverbeds, and leaves scars on the continent that are still visible today. And this isn't just some wild guess. Geologists have evidence that this has happened before. We see traces of massive floods, deep erosion, and riverbeds that look more like canyons. Take the channeled scablands in Washington state. They're proof of catastrophic floods from about 15,000 years ago when the glacial Lake Missoula breached. The ground there looks like it wasn't carved by a river, but torn away in one violent motion. When geologists study these landscapes, they realize one thing. Ice dams don't just break, they fail catastrophically, and the consequences are never just local. On paper, the Lake Agassiz theory doesn't just look possible, it looks inevitable. The lake was massive. If it breached at the right time and in the right direction, shutting down the great ocean conveyor would have been a mathematical certainty. Try to imagine that sound. At first, it isn't even a sound. It's a low-frequency tremor vibrating through the soles of your boots. Then comes a roar, rolling in from the ice wall, a sound that isn't thunder and isn't wind, it's heavier. Then the first seam in the wall gives way like a crack in an old windshield. For a split second, it looks like the dam might hold, and then it simply ceases to exist. A wall of water, hundreds of feet high, surges across the plain. It doesn't follow riverbeds, it carves them. Forests vanish.
Boulders the size of houses are tossed around like pebbles. 24 hours later, where a forest once stood, there are only bare, jagged rock scars, grooves visible from space even 12,000 years later. This is why the theory was so seductive. It's elegant, it's logical. It links a sudden deep freeze to simple, understandable physics. For decades, this was the definitive story. But beautiful theories have a dangerous flaw. They look perfect until you start poking at the details. The first problem is the timing. We have evidence of these breaches, but pinning them exactly to the start of the Younger Dryas is proving impossible. Different dating methods give us discrepancies of several centuries. And when you're talking about triggering a global collapse, close enough isn't a proof, it's just a hope. The second problem is the route. If that water really dumped into the Atlantic, it had to pass through the St. Lawrence Valley. But research shows that path was still blocked by ice at the time. The most logical front door was locked. That leaves the side doors, northwest into the Arctic or south into the Gulf of Mexico. But in those scenarios, the fresh water wouldn't hit the areas where the cooling was most intense. In the grand story of climate, it's not enough to just have a lot of water. You have to deliver it to the right place at the exactly right moment. The third problem is the scale. Computer models show that even if the conveyor belt did stop, that alone wouldn't be enough.
The North Atlantic and Europe would have cooled down, sure, but we find traces of the Younger Dryas in Asia, South America, and Africa. The conveyor theory explains a big piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture. And this is where the story gets really interesting, when the cleanest, most logical version fails to answer every question. Other explanations step onto the stage. They're sharper, louder, and sometimes sound borderline insane, but you can't just dismiss them because they sound too cinematic. Enter the second theory, an extraterrestrial impact, a comet or an asteroid. It sounds like a plot from a summer blockbuster. The sky, a flash, an impact, fire, dust, total cold. In 2007, a group of researchers published a paper that dropped this hypothesis into the scientific community like a grenade. They claimed to have found evidence of such an event from roughly 12,900 years ago, not as a single crater on a map, but as a collection of anomalous materials buried in the sediment layer from the very start of the Younger Dryas. They found microscopic diamonds, nanodiamonds, that only form under extreme temperature and pressure. They found spherules, tiny droplets of melted rock. They found rare metals like iridium, which is usually a calling card for meteorites. They found particles of amorphous carbon, which looked like the aftermath of massive firestorms. And they even found the black mat, a layer of dark organic material interpreted as a global soot deposit. And according to the authors, these weren't just in one spot. They were found across dozens of sites in North America and Europe.
The scenario they proposed looked like this. A comet about 2.5 to 3 miles, 4 to 5 kilometers wide, enters the atmosphere over North America and explodes. It doesn't necessarily have to hit the ground head-on. It's an airburst. Think of the Tunguska event, but about 1,000 times more powerful. You wouldn't hear a pop or see a dot in the sky. You'd witness a blinding, monstrous rupture. The sky would change color, the horizon would ignite, and a shock wave would tear through space as if the atmosphere itself had been weaponized. If you were standing in the middle of a prairie 600 miles, 1,000 kilometers from the blast, you'd first see a second sun, too bright to look at, too white for fire. For a few moments, your own shadow would be sharper than it's ever been. Then the sky would turn a shade for which we don't have a word, somewhere between a copper dawn and a furnace. Then, after a few minutes of haunting silence, the sound would hit, a low, crushing roar that vibrates in your ribs. And even before the first embers began to rain down from the sky, you would realize this isn't a storm, this is something you pray to. According to this theory, the fires come first. A continent-sized firestorm sweeps across the land. Forests are incinerated. Animals perish in mass. The Clovis people, the dominant culture at the time, are either wiped out or forced to scatter. Then the dust and ash take over.
Trillions of tons of debris are kicked into the stratosphere, choking out the sun and triggering an impact winter, a mechanism very similar to the catastrophe that ended the dinosaurs. Finally, the sheer heat and general instability hit the ice sheets, releasing a surge of fresh water that delivers a knockout blow to the ocean conveyor. It's almost the perfect disaster chain, a celestial strike followed by fire, atmospheric collapse, and oceanic shutdown, a triple or even quadruple punch to the planet's gut. It's no wonder the scientific community reacted so strongly. Some embraced the hypothesis with open arms because it tied so many loose ends together. The cooling, the fires, the cultural collapse, the extinction of megafauna, and those strange materials in the soil. Others, however, saw exactly what science fears most, a story that's a little too perfect, a narrative that plays too well into our human love for grand drama. The debate is still raging. In the years since, some studies have reported new evidence of that anomalous layer, while others either couldn't replicate the results or explained the findings as normal natural processes that don't require a comet. In science, a one-hit wonder doesn't cut it. You have to be able to do it again and again. And this is where the impact hypothesis started to lose that shiny certainty it once had. But there's another problem, an especially nagging one. There's no crater. If an object several miles wide actually slammed into the Earth, you'd expect a scar, a big, convincing, undeniable one. A crater dozens of miles across, a geological wound you can point to on a map and say, right there, that's where it hit. But it's just not there.
Proponents of the theory argue that there might not have been a direct ground impact. It could have been an airburst, like Tunguska, but infinitely more powerful. Or the object could have hit the ice sheet, and the evidence simply melted away with the glaciers. Physically, these are possibilities, but for skeptics, the lack of a crater makes the whole story much less convincing. Once the primary physical evidence is blurred, the hypothesis has to rely on a complex, shaky combination of circumstantial clues. Strange, isn't it? Every theory promises a revelation, and every single one leaves you hanging at the last second. Then comes the third explanation: volcanism. At first glance, it almost sounds boring compared to comets and mid-air explosions, but that's only until you remember what a truly massive eruption can do. One powerful volcano can ruin the climate for years. A series of eruptions that can last for decades. Enormous amounts of ash and sulfates get pumped into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight, reflecting radiation, and triggering a sudden, brutal cooling. History has felt these blows before. The eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815 led to the year without a summer in 1816. We're talking crop failures, famine, snow in June, and shattered growing seasons across both Europe and North America. Even further back, about 74,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano allegedly triggered a volcanic winter that lasted for decades, nearly pushing humanity through a genetic bottleneck.
What is a volcanic winter like when you get down from the atmospheric models to the level of a single blade of grass? It's a summer where the light filters through a sickly, yellowish-gray film. You can see the sun, but you can't feel its heat. The sky looks the same for months, murky and diseased. Plants bloom out of habit, but the fruit never ripens. Grain stays small and hollow. Cows give less milk because the grass has no nutrients. A child grows slower in the winter because the mother's milk is lean. And this doesn't happen for just one season, it's season after season, until a farming family suddenly realizes they have more grown sons than they have bread to last until spring. So the idea isn't crazy, quite the opposite. There's just one question. Is there evidence of such an eruption exactly 12,900 years ago? The answer is painfully inconvenient, yes and no. Greenland's ice cores do show sulfate peaks around that time, and sulfates are classic markers of volcanic activity. That's a big deal. But the problem is that these peaks don't look grand enough to explain something on the scale of the Younger Dryas. They look more like a mid-sized eruption or a series of smaller ones, rather than a monstrous Toba-style superstrike. And here's the next knot in the thread. We don't have a candidate. Which volcano actually blew? Where was it? What trace did it leave? Usually, massive eruptions leave behind obvious scars, calderas, layers of tephra, volcanic ash spread across thousands of miles, and chemical signatures that can be traced back to the source. For the Younger Dryas, nothing that definitive has been found yet.
Of course, you can try to build theoretical life rafts to save the volcanic theory. You could suggest it was an underwater eruption, Or maybe several volcanoes blew at once in different parts of the world, and their combined impact did the trick. But we run into the same old problem. As soon as a theory becomes convenient, it starts requiring too many extra assumptions, too many ifs. Until we find hard evidence, the volcanic version remains a serious but ultimately incomplete guess. Then there's the fourth theory, solar activity. On the surface, this one sounds almost low-key. No collapsing ice dams, no mid-air explosions, no continent-wide firestorms, just the sun. If its activity drops, the energy flow decreases, the radiation balance shifts, and the climate begins to react. The sun has cycles. The most famous is the 11-year sunspot cycle, but there are much longer fluctuations too. One of the best-known examples is the Maunder minimum in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, roughly from 1645 to 1715. During that time, sunspots almost vanished, and Europe suffered through the Little Ice Age, marked by brutal winters and failed harvests. It's a tempting thought. What if something similar, but much deeper and longer, happened right before the Younger Dryas? We can't measure solar activity from the distant past directly. There were no telescopes or sensors. We have to read it through proxy data in tree rings and ice cores, looking at chemical traces in ice and tree rings, isotopes of carbon and beryllium that reflect solar activity. These change based on how well the sun's magnetic field is shielding the Earth. And the signal is there. During the Younger Dryas, the sun was indeed quieter than usual. But the scale of that dip seems too modest to single-handedly drag a warming world back into the ice. A solar minimum can nudge the climate or amplify other hits, but on its own, it's probably not the director of a global catastrophe. So, once again, the answer is frustratingly mid-range. The sun might have helped, it might have played along, but it likely wasn't the sole conductor of this disaster. This brings us to the most unsettling part of the whole story. When one version doesn't cover all the bases, when the second trips over a missing crater, the third can't find its volcano, and the fourth is too weak, you're left with an almost inevitable conclusion. Maybe the Younger Dryas wasn't caused by just one thing. Maybe it was a cascade. Think of it as a chain reaction of processes hitting the system one after another, each making the next one worse. Ocean circulation shifts slightly, the ice regime changes, a solar dip adds some pressure, maybe a few fires or some dust get thrown into the mix. Perhaps the climate system's own internal wobbles played a role. At some point, Earth, already balancing on the edge between cold and warm, simply tipped over the threshold. For a hunter walking the plains during that decade, it wasn't an academic debate. It was far simpler and much more terrifying. He didn't see oceanic currents, and he didn't know the word sulfates.
What he saw was the northern wind arriving a month earlier than it should have.
He saw the grass, the same grass his children remembered, turning brown and withered by August. He saw the herd his grandfather always found at the river bend vanish without a trace. That is the true face of a cascade of causes at the level of human skin. The world stops being predictable long before scientists 12,000 years later can give it a name. Threshold, that's the key word here. The Younger Dryas isn't just scary because of a specific cause we can't quite pin down. It's scary because of how the event actually unfolded. It's the idea that a climate system can store tension for a long time, looking stable on the surface, and then flip into a completely different state almost instantly. Like a ball sitting in a shallow dip, one nudge and it rolls into a different hollow entirely. If that's the case, the whole conversation changes. We're no longer looking for a single murderer. We're looking for the moment a complex system reached its breaking point. The moment when the next nudge, whatever it was, stopped being just another event and became the trigger. This is why the Younger Dryas still haunts climatologists, geologists, and archaeologists. It's not just a story about ancient cold. It's a story about how the ocean, ice, atmosphere, sun, volcanoes, ecosystems, and humans are all locked together. It's a reminder that civilizations and cultures almost always feel permanent when you're standing inside them. And then the environment shifts, and that permanence turns out to be just a habit that held up until the first serious blow. But while we've been talking about theories, another thread hangs unsolved. What was happening to the animal kingdom during all this? Who didn't make the cut? And how closely is the Younger Dryas linked to the extinction of the Ice Age giants, the megafauna that humans were still living with, hunting, and sharing a rapidly shifting planet with? Because if the climate really did snap that hard, the fallout wouldn't just be about temperature or human migration. It would hit the entire food chain. And that's where the picture gets even darker. There is another theory out there. It doesn't involve spectacular flashes in the sky or massive ice dams collapsing in slow motion. In fact, it's unsettling because it's so understated. This is the theory of internal climate cycles. It suggests that the planet is naturally capable of wobbling and, thanks to feedback loops, snapping from one climate state to another. Not because something hit it, not because a supervolcano blew its top, but because a complex system sometimes reaches its limit and just tips over. It's one of the most uncomfortable thoughts in the whole Younger Dryas story. You can argue with a comet, you can look for a crater, you can debate a volcano by looking for sulfates, you can check flood routes for a lake breach. But what do you do with a version where the climate itself acts like a nervous, unstable system that holds its breath for a long time and then suddenly screams?
Think of a ball on a bumpy landscape full of hills and valleys. The valleys are stable states. The ball can sit in one for years, decades, centuries. You look at it and think everything is fine, it's under control.
But then, something gives it a tiny, almost invisible nudge. The ball rolls over a ridge, and after that, there's no stopping it. That's the scary part. Right up until the moment of the collapse, everything can look perfectly normal. This is what researchers call climate bi-stability. Earth has a few relatively stable modes, warm, cold, and somewhere in between. And it doesn't always crawl slowly between them. Sometimes it jumps. Is there actually proof the climate can act this way? Absolutely. Look at the climate records from the last ice age. Scientists see a recurring pattern of rapid temperature jumps known as Dansgaard-Oeschger events. It wasn't a one-time thing or a weird anomaly. It was a recurring pattern. And some of these flips happened within decades. That means a person born at the start of a shift could reach middle age in a climate their parents wouldn't even recognize. We like to think of climate as a slow, steady background, something that changes so gradually you die of old age before noticing. Turns out, that's not always the case. In this light, the Younger Dryas might not be a unique act of God or a one-off catastrophe. It might just have been the last big violent flip before the climate finally settled into the warm Holocene state we live in today. This changes the entire perspective. The question isn't just what hit the world, but what state was the world in when it got hit? If the system was already teetering on the edge, even a minor nudge could be the final blow.
And that's the trick. There might not be a single killer. A small shift in one area triggers a change in another, which amplifies the original nudge, and suddenly the system isn't just shaking, it's jumping. This theory has a major strength and a major weakness. The strength, it explains why the collapse was so sharp, even if no single culprit was big enough to cause it alone. The weakness, it's almost impossible to use for predictions. It's easy to connect the dots after the fact. Predicting when a complex system will reach its breaking point before it happens is infinitely harder. So the most accurate answer to what caused the Younger Dryas remains almost frustratingly simple. We don't know for sure. The most plausible scenario is a perfect storm of factors. Maybe a lake breach hit a climate system that was already unstable. Maybe a dip in solar activity overlapped with a shift in ocean currents. Or maybe a volcanic episode, which wouldn't have been enough on its own, became the tipping point when combined with everything else. It's not the most cinematic answer, but it's the most honest one. There is, however, a bolder version, that a comet impact did happen, and it was the spark that lit the whole fuse. It would perfectly explain the suddenness and the scale of why the system broke in so many directions at once. But the evidence for it is still too controversial for many scientists to sign off on. However, there are things we know for a fact. The event was real. This isn't a dating error or a local glitch in the data.
Roughly 12,900 years ago, the world plunged into a deep global freeze, and it lasted for about 1,200 years.
Not just a few bad winters, not a single off cycle, a whole era in human terms. And the speed of this change, even now when we're used to the word crisis, is physically shocking. Based on Greenland ice cores, temperatures could have dropped by several degrees in just a matter of decades. Decades, not geological eons, not slow-motion millennia, a time frame that fits inside a single human life. You could literally be born in one world and grow old in another. By climate standards, that's not just fast, that's aggressive. A thread of tension has been hanging in the background. We've mentioned cultural collapses and the disappearance of the Clovis people, but right next to that is another big question, one that's almost as unsettling as the climate mechanism itself. And the consequences weren't academic, they were brutal. A mass extinction of megafauna began. Human populations hit a massive crisis. Ecosystems collapsed and rebuilt themselves. Food chains snapped. Familiar migration routes vanished. Species that had spent thousands of years fitting into a stable system suddenly found themselves in a world where the rules no longer applied. But the recovery was just as sudden, and that's the most striking part. About 11,700 years ago, temperatures shot back up. This marked the end of the Younger Dryas and the beginning of the Holocene, the warm era we're living in right now.
This is where the story stops being just ancient history. Once you accept that the climate can flip that fast, you're forced to ask the next question: could it happen again? This isn't a cozy science doc question you ponder before bed. It's the kind of question that's genuinely unsettling. Modern global warming is already shifting ocean currents. Based on various measurements and reconstructions, the Gulf Stream is weakening. The Greenland ice sheet is melting, dumping fresh water into the North Atlantic. It all sounds way too familiar, almost uncomfortably familiar. The very conditions that likely triggered the Younger Dryas are appearing again, not as a footprint of an ancient catastrophe, but as a process unfolding right before our eyes. And this time, the chill isn't felt on some ancient plane, it's felt right down your spine. Some models show that, in a paradoxical twist, further warming could lead to localized cooling in Europe and the North Atlantic if the thermohaline circulation weakens too much. This is the exact idea Hollywood ran with in The Day After Tomorrow. Of course, they turned it into a spectacle with New York freezing over in a matter of days. That's pure entertainment. Physically, that kind of speed is impossible. But the core idea isn't crazy. A shutdown or sharp weakening of ocean circulation is a real-world scenario, and the consequences would be severe. We're not talking about a new ice age in a week or an instant white apocalypse. We're talking about significant cooling in Europe, shifting weather patterns, agricultural failures, strained power grids, crop losses, price hikes, mass migrations, and social unrest. It's a crisis that doesn't start with a cinematic explosion, but with a long, grinding period of instability. If a shift like that starts abruptly, the way it seemingly did in the Younger Dryas, the time we'd have to adapt would be terrifyingly short. That's the real worry, not the movies, the lack of time. So, what can we do? First, we watch the system. We track ocean currents,
temperatures, salinity, and ice sheet dynamics, looking for early warning signs of a tipping point. Today, we have satellites, ocean buoys, underwater probes, and massive data sets that the Clovis people couldn't have even imagined. But knowledge isn't salvation. You can't just turn an ocean current back on like a faucet. That leaves us with two main paths: adaptation and prevention. Adaptation means moving agriculture, overhauling energy grids, stockpiling food, and planning for population shifts. Behind those dry words is a very physical reality: a warm apartment in the winter, a functioning power grid, bread on the shelf, and medicine delivered on time. That's what civilizational adaptation actually looks like. Prevention means trying to slow down the global warming that's melting the glaciers and changing the oceans. It's not a quick fix, it's not simple, and it's not heroic in a Hollywood sense, but it is the only realistic long-term path. Because the Younger Dryas isn't a museum anomaly, it's a warning. It's direct evidence that Earth's climate is unstable, unpredictable, and capable of snapping into dangerous states without much notice. If we keep pushing the system, heating the planet, and changing the chemistry of the oceans, we risk seeing it respond not with a gradual decline, but with a leap. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in our lifetime, but that doesn't make the mechanism any less real. Now, let's do something crucial for these kinds of conversations. Let's move away from charts, terms, and models and step into reality. Because temperature curves on a graph are abstractions. The Younger Dryas wasn't an abstraction. It was concrete. It was real. It was cold, hungry, and terrifying. Imagine you're one of the Clovis peoples. You're living in what is now the United States, maybe somewhere in Montana or Wyoming, about 12,950 years ago. Your group, your family, your entire world consists of 30 or 40 people. You live a semi-nomadic life. In the summer, you follow the bison and mammoth herds. You hunt and gather berries, roots and nuts, everything the land provides. In the winter, you retreat to sheltered spots, using caves or built structures where meat stays frozen and the wind can't reach your bones as easily. For the last few generations, life has been relatively good, not easy but manageable. The elders told stories of their own grandfathers who remembered a time when the ice was everywhere, a time when the cold killed constantly, not just occasionally. But then the climate began to soften.
Summers became longer and warmer. The animals multiplied. Hunting became reliable. The population grew. When the world warms up, people relax, not because they're foolish, but because the environment becomes generous. You get used to being lucky. You trust that the trail will lead to game and the ice will melt on time. And those are the exact habits the climate breaks most painfully when it shifts. And then, the summer you've been waiting for finally arrives. Only, it doesn't. Usually, June means warmth. The ground finally lets go of the frost. Everything turns green. The calves and fawns are growing, and the herds become predictable.
The air smells like damp grass and open water. But this year, it's like the world walked through the wrong door. It's cold, it's snowing, and the snow isn't melting. Most days the temperature stays well below freezing. At first you think it's just a weird week, then another. Eventually you stop trusting your own internal calendar. You tell yourself that if you just hold on a little longer, things will get back to normal. But they don't. A month passes, then another. There is no heat. The plants that just started to bud freeze and die. The animals move on, searching for food and milder weather. Your group follows, but the herds move faster than people carrying children, elders, spears and hides, all the weight that, in normal times, is just called life. You start falling behind, and that is a very bad sign. Hunting gets harder. Game is scarce.
The animals you do find are emaciated, which makes them more dangerous than usual. Even a bear isn't the lazy king of the forest you're used to tracking. He's hungry, irritable, and on edge. Just like you, he's struggling to survive until tomorrow. He doesn't forgive mistakes. By fall, a season that never really had a summer, your supplies are almost gone. There's a little meat, but not enough. No berries. The plants didn't yield a harvest. The nuts didn't ripen. It's like the world folded in on itself early and failed to provide what you were counting on. And then winter hits, way too soon. It's only October, but the blizzards have arrived, and it's -4 degrees Fahrenheit, -20 degrees Celsius. Normally, that kind of cold doesn't show up until December. But the Younger Dryas doesn't care about your habits. You don't have the supplies for a season this long. And the elders are the first to go. It usually starts quietly. No screaming, no tragic speeches. A person just stops getting up. They sit by the fire longer. They eat less. They go silent, staring into space. A body weakened by hunger and cold simply gives up. Then come the children, especially the little ones. Their bodies are smaller, but they actually need more food per pound than an adult. When food is scarce, they pay the price first. This is where the story becomes unbearably personal. You watch your 3-year-old brother waste away day by day. First he stops running, then he stops playing. Eventually, he's just lying by the fire, breathing so softly you have to lean in to make sure he's still there. Your mother tries to feed him her own portions. She gives him the scraps she needs to survive, but a mother's sacrifice doesn't create food out of thin air. In the middle of the night, he dies, quietly, in his sleep, right next to a fire that still wasn't warm enough. After that, decisions are made differently. There's no hope for a happy ending. The group decides to head south. Maybe it's warmer there. Maybe there are more animals. Maybe there's still a chance. You pack what you can carry, abandon your camp, and leave. But this isn't a heroic march. It's a slow-motion torture. The snow is waist-deep. The wind cuts your face. Blizzards blind you. Your clothes are soaked with sweat, which then chills and clings to your skin like a layer of ice. Every step is a victory. Lift your leg, pull it out of the drift. Don't fall. for hours. Your face aches from the cold until it goes numb, which is actually worse because the pain at least reminded you that you were alive. You're reduced to a terrifyingly honest kind of math. Make it to evening, find fuel, start a fire, and don't let the children fall asleep too early. Usually you navigate by the stars, but the sky is a solid grey blanket. There is only the white haze. You're heading south on pure faith, and very quickly it becomes clear that not everyone can keep up. Every day someone falls behind, someone is too weak, someone is frozen through. Someone just can't move their legs anymore from hunger.
The worst part of these stories isn't death itself. It's the moment the group realizes that if they wait for everyone, they all die. That's the kind of choice that changes a person forever. You have to leave them. They stay behind in the snow, alone. A group that started with 30 people shrinks to 20, then 15, then 10. The horror of these numbers is how quickly they stop being just data. This isn't math. These are faces, voices, hands that were sharing food with you just yesterday, laughter by the fire, arguments, hunts, stories. All of it slowly vanishes from the world, as if the cold itself is biting people off, one by one. You walk for weeks, then months. You run into other groups, just as displaced, just as terrified, and just as angry from helplessness. You huddle together, you trade information, you try to find out where it's better. But they all say the same thing. The South isn't paradise. It's cold there too. Not quite as lethal as the North, but still bad. It's bad everywhere. One hunter shows you where he saw bison tracks far to the south. Another shakes his head. The tracks are old. The herd is gone. Someone talks about a river where you can still catch fish. Someone else replies that the river is already choked with ice. Everyone is just feeling their way through the dark. The world has stopped being a place you can read. An old man says the world is coming to an end, that the gods are angry, that this is a punishment, and no one really argues.
Not because they've all become believers, but because there's simply no other explanation that feels more convincing. Not right now, in this wind, with these empty stomachs and children who have stopped crying because they no longer have the strength. A year passes, then 2, then 3. The cold doesn't leave. At some point it hits you. This isn't a glitch. It's not just one bad season or a streak of bad luck. This is the new reality. The groups that can't adapt simply vanish, being too tied to the old spots, the old routes, the old prey, and the old hunting strategies becomes a death sentence. The mammoths are nearly gone. Their grazing lands are buried under snow, and digging for food is becoming impossible. The herds thin out and die, and if your entire life was built around hunting these giants, your foundation disappears along with them. So you have to change, fast, hard, with no room for nostalgia. The group switches to small game, rabbits, birds, rodents. There's less meat per kill, but there are more of them, and sometimes they're easier to catch.
You learn to fish. The rivers freeze over, but life continues beneath the ice. You stand there on the frozen surface, your fingers aching so much that the spear feels like a stranger's hand. Your breath comes out in thick clouds of steam. Under your feet, the ice moans and creaks. You hack a hole, drop your gear into the black water, and you wait, not because it's easy, but because you have nothing else to count on.
This is where the real world gives you a series of brutally fast lessons. You learn to celebrate a single fish as if you'd brought down an entire bison. You learn to butcher every last scrap, crack the bones and suck out the marrow. In a starving world, the concept of not good enough disappears. There is only edible and we won't make it. It's through these slow, agonizing adjustments that a new world is born. Not out of triumph, but out of necessity, fear, and the sheer stubbornness of the living. What an archaeologist will later call a shift in the toolkit is much simpler and more violent for you. Some tools are suddenly useless, others are needed immediately. Skills that fed you for generations stop working. You have to master new ones instantly or die. Migration routes, winter camps, the size of your group, everything changes. The very logic of survival is rewritten. Even the conversations around the fire, if you can even find enough fuel for one, become different. You used to argue about the best time to hunt or whether to follow a distant herd. Now you argue about who you can afford to carry and who you can't. Do you stay another day for a frail elder? Do you risk your last spear on a large, dangerous animal? Do you split the food evenly or give more to the one who actually has the strength to hunt tomorrow? This isn't just physical survival, it's the breaking and remaking of morality under extreme pressure. This is where the climate stops being the background and starts being the director. It doesn't just make things colder, it rewrites behavior. It rewrites culture. It decides who lives to see the next generation and what that generation will teach its children. When we say today that the Younger Dryas caused a cultural crisis, it sounds clinical, too dry. In reality, it meant the world stopped keeping its promises. You go where the game always was, and it's empty. You set up camp where you always wintered, and the wind cuts right through it. You wait for the seasons to change, and you get snow instead. The system you trusted breaks in your hands. That is the true horror of a climate snap. It's not just the cold, it's the loss of a reliable world. And that's why the Younger Dryas is so important for us today. It shows us more than just the physics of cooling. It shows us the price paid by living things. One sharp shift and animal migrations collapse. Plant growth cycles fail. Human exchange networks fall apart. The balance between species shifts. Hunger doesn't just strike one spot, it accumulates across the entire system. These catastrophes rarely look like one big cinematic scene. They look like a long, grinding streak of things getting worse. A series of seasons, each one slightly more brutal than the last. You keep hoping next year will fix it. But then a few cycles pass and it's clear the world has moved on and you're still living at the old address.
Now add the megafauna to this picture, those massive animals that were already living on the knife's edge between greatness and vulnerability.
If a small group of humans can barely survive a blow like this, what happens to giants that need massive territories, massive grazing lands, and a perfectly predictable seasonal rhythm? This is where the Younger Dryas stops being just a human story. It becomes a story about the disappearance of an entire world. And that is exactly where we have to look next, at a world that didn't just get poorer, but literally started losing its biggest, oldest, and most iconic inhabitants. But before we get to the mammoths and mastodons, let's stay with the people for one more second. Because the cold didn't just kill, it forced us to reinvent ourselves. When winter stops being a rough season and becomes a permanent way of life, everything narrows down to one obsessive goal: keeping warm. Not cozy, not comfortable, just biologically warm. It's a matter of life and death. You hack holes in the ice, you carve bone hooks, you spend hours hunched over that dark frozen water. Your fingers go numb almost instantly, and your skin begins to crack. As you stare into that small circle of black water, you realize that it's not just about the catch. Your group's entire future depends on it. Eventually, you start building more permanent shelters. You're not just finding caves anymore, you're constructing them. You use the bones of dead mammoths for the frame, stretch heavy hides over them, and pack the whole thing with snow. Snow is actually a better insulator against the wind than you'd think. Inside, these dwellings don't feel like homes, they're a compromise with the cold.
You sit in the dim light, breathing in smoke, listening to the wind howl outside. The fire has to stay lit almost constantly, but that's a trap. Fire needs fuel. Fuel takes energy to gather. To have energy, you need food. And to find food, you have to go back out into the very cold you're trying to escape. The Younger Dryas was a loop where every answer just created a new problem. Clothing changes too. Hides are treated more carefully, and seams are sewn tighter. You use animal fat to waterproof everything. You learn to wear layers. Your face is covered almost completely, leaving just a slit for your eyes. Otherwise, you'd get frostbite in minutes. You breathe through frozen fabric, with ice crusting your eyelashes. Every breath feels like cold metal in your lungs, but you keep moving. Standing still is a death sentence. Food becomes sacred, especially fat. Fat isn't just food, it's heat, it's energy, it's one more day of life. The group's ethics shift. In good times, you can be generous. In a starving world, generosity is a luxury you can't afford. Meat is divided strictly by contribution, by status, by need. If you steal, the punishment is brutal, usually exile. And in this world, exile is just a slow way to die. Social rules get harder, groups get smaller, roles get simpler. Mistakes are paid for instantly. The sick and the injured stop being people you pity. They become a burden. And yes, in the worst times, people
It sounds horrific. It is horrific. But the Younger Dryas didn't care about our modern morals. The environment burned away everything except cold, hard math. Even biology changes. When body fat drops too low, menstruation stops. Pregnancy requires massive resources that just don't exist. And even the children who are born often don't make it past infancy. The population shrinks slowly, stubbornly, and almost silently. Campsites are abandoned, entire regions go empty, and this lasts for decades. A child born at the start of the Younger Dryas is now middle-aged. For them, this frozen wasteland is the only world that exists. The warm times are just legends told by the elders, stories about tall grass, long summers, and fat animals. You listen, but you don't really believe it. Now you're the one teaching your kids how to survive, how to track a hair through a blizzard, how to keep your fingers from rotting off, how to butcher a seal without a single drop of precious oil. And here is the hardest part. Your children will never see a mammoth. They're already gone. When the environment pushes this hard for this long, it doesn't just kill the weak, it wipes out entire branches of life. You don't know if it will ever end. You think the cold is forever. But then, when you're an old man, maybe 60, which was an incredible age back then, the world does something it seems to have forgotten how to do. Spring arrives, a real spring, not a gray, slushy, temporary break, a warm, fast, honest-to-God spring. The snow melts hungrily, revealing the earth and letting the water flow. Shoots appear, then thick greenery. Trees burst into bloom. The animals return. Reindeer and bison start moving up from the south again. The air, which had been your enemy for a lifetime, suddenly smells like life. Your children look at this like it's a miracle. They've literally never seen anything like it. The grass grows knee-high, flowers are everywhere, insects buzz. It's finally warm enough to take off the heavy furs and feel the sun on your skin, not as a threat, but as genuine warmth. In that moment, you remember what your grandfather said. The old world wasn't a fairy tale, it was real. At first, you don't trust it. You wake up at night expecting the frost to return by morning. But weeks pass and the ground stays soft. The air smells like damp earth, sap, and warm bark. Even the way people walk changes. It's as if the cold had forced them to hunch over for years, and now finally someone gave them permission to stand tall. When winter isn't just a tough season, but a permanent state of existence, life revolves around one obsession: staying warm. Not cozy, not comfortable, just warm. It becomes a biological necessity. You carve holes in the ice, you fashion hooks out of bone, you sit for hours over that black, freezing water. Your fingers go numb almost instantly. Your skin starts to crack. As you stare into that small circle of dark water, you realize your entire future depends on it. It's not just a catch, it's tomorrow. Eventually, you start building more permanent shelters. Caves aren't enough anymore. You build insulated structures yourself, using what's available. Mammoth bones. You use them for the frame, stretch skins over the top, and then bury the whole thing in snow. Snow is a better insulator against the wind than almost anything else. Inside, it doesn't feel like a home.
It feels like a compromise with the cold. You sit in the dim light, breathing in smoke, listening to the wind howl outside. Inside, the fire has to burn constantly, but that's a trap. To keep the fire going, you need fuel. To get fuel, you need energy. To have energy, you need food. And to get food, you have to go back out into the very cold you're trying to escape. The Younger Dryas is a closed loop. Every answer just creates a new problem. Clothing changes too. You treat skins more carefully. You double-stitch the seams. You use animal fat to waterproof everything. Layers are mandatory. You cover your face completely, leaving only a tiny slit for your eyes. Without it, you'd have frostbite in minutes. You breathe through frozen fabric. The air feels like cold metal in your lungs, but you keep moving. Standing still is a death sentence. Food becomes sacred, especially fat. Fat isn't just food, it's heat, it's a battery, it's an extra day of life. Because of this, the tribe's ethics change. In good times, you can be generous. In lean times, generosity is a luxury you can't afford. Meat is divided strictly by contribution, status, and need. If someone steals, the punishment is brutal.
Usually, it's banishment. And in this world, banishment is just a slow way to die. Social rules get meaner, groups get smaller, roles are stripped down to the basics. Mistakes have immediate costs. The sick, the wounded, and the elderly stop being objects of sympathy and start being a burden. In the hardest times, people are left behind. It sounds horrific. It is horrific. But the Younger Dryas doesn't care about our modern morals. The environment burns away everything except cold, hard calculation. Birth rates drop. If a woman doesn't have enough body fat, her cycle stops. Pregnancy requires resources that simply don't exist. Even the children who are born rarely survive infancy. The population fades away, slowly, stubbornly, and in silence. Camps are abandoned. Whole regions go dark. This lasts for decades. Anyone who was a child at the start of the Younger Dryas is now middle-aged. This frozen world is the only normal they've ever known. They don't remember the warmth. To them, the stories the elders tell sound like fairy tales, legends of tall grass, long summers, and fat animals. You listen, but you don't really believe them. Now you're the one teaching your own kids how to survive, how to track a rabbit through a blizzard, how to avoid losing fingers to frostbite, how to butcher a seal without a single drop of precious oil. Then comes the hardest part. Your children will never see a mammoth. They're gone. When an environment stays this brutal for this long, it doesn't just kill people, it wipes out entire species.
You start to wonder if this is just how the world is now. Maybe the cold is forever. But then, when you're an old man, maybe 60, which is an incredible age for this era, something happens that the world had forgotten to hope for. Spring arrives, a real spring, not a grey, freezing break in the weather, but a fast, warm, honest-to-God spring. The snow melts aggressively, exposing the earth and turning into rushing water. Sprouts appear, then deep green grass. The trees bloom, the animals return. Reindeer and bison start moving up from the south again. The air, which had been your enemy for a lifetime, suddenly smells like life. Your children look at this like it's a miracle, and for them it is. They've never seen anything like it. The brass is knee-high, flowers are everywhere, insects are buzzing. It gets so warm you can actually take off your heavy furs and feel the sun on your skin, not as a threat, but as actual warmth. That's when you realize the old stories weren't myths. The old world was real. At first, you don't trust it. You wake up at night expecting the ground to be frozen again by morning. But weeks pass and the soil stays soft. The air smells like damp earth, sap, and warm bark. Even the way people walk changes. For years, the cold forced everyone to hunch over. Now they're finally standing tall. Summer finally stays. It's long, it's hot, and the berries are everywhere. Nuts actually have time to ripen. Prey animals are thriving and well-fed, which makes hunting easier.
For the first time in generations, the tribe doesn't just have enough to get by. They have a surplus. It's a simple word, but that surplus is exactly where the future of civilization is hidden. Having extra changes everything. Children aren't dying in waves anymore. Winter still comes, but it's milder. Survival is no longer a desperate daily battle. Then the next spring is warm, and the summer after that. Eventually it clicks. This isn't just a lucky break. The cold is truly gone. The very rhythm of the human body shifts. People move differently. They start building for more than just one season. You stop thinking about how to survive the week and start thinking about next year. Rituals emerge, dancing, offerings to gods or spirits. It feels like the world has been saved, like the punishment is finally over. The population booms. Groups split off and spread into new territories. During the Ice Age, you had to be mobile. You kept your belongings light and stayed on the move. Now you can settle down. You can build permanent homes and develop complex social ties. Even our relationship with time changes. In the frozen years, you lived in tiny increments, until sunset, until the next camp, until the blizzard stopped. When the climate softens, your perspective widens. You think about a place you want to return to in a year. You think about where your children will live, not just this winter, but the next one. This is the psychological bedrock of civilization, the ability to look past your own hunger. Something monumental happens in the Middle East. The cooling there was less intense, but it was still enough to stall early attempts at farming. Now those attempts start up again. The wheat and barley are still wild, but people notice that seeds can be more than just gathered. They can be planted, they can be tended. It seems like a small observation, but it's actually one of the greatest turning points in human history. Within a few centuries, these observations trigger the Neolithic revolution. We get agriculture, domesticated animals, permanent settlements, and massive population growth. Eventually, we get cities, writing, empires, technology. In a very real sense, all of this was made possible by the warming that followed the Younger Dryas. Civilization requires a surplus of resources, and farming provides exactly that. One person can produce enough food for 10. That gives the other 9 the freedom to do something else: build, trade, paint, calculate, record, and think.
That's why the Younger Dryas isn't just a story about the cold. It's a story about how close humanity came to a completely different future. If the cold had lasted another 1,000 years, we probably would have survived, but our numbers would have stayed low. Technology would have crawled. The civilization we view as a natural result of history might never have appeared, at least not in a form we'd recognize. It's a haunting thought. Sometimes the entire future of the world hangs on whether or not the ice retreats in time. But the Younger Dryas wasn't just a test for humans.
The groups, species, and ecosystems that could adapt survived. Those that couldn't simply vanished. Mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, American lions, the list is long. And it raises an inevitable question: why then? For a long time, the popular theory was that humans did it. It's called the Pleistocene overkill hypothesis. The idea is simple. Humans arrived in the Americas and Europe, hunted too efficiently, and wiped out the megafauna in a few centuries. It sounds logical, but it doesn't tell the whole story. These animals had survived for millions of years alongside dangerous predators. Why would small groups of humans with stone spears suddenly be more lethal than anything that came before them? This is where the climate comes back into the frame. The Younger Dryas shattered habitats, cut off food supplies, and fragmented populations. These herds were already weakened when they faced the added pressure of human hunters. It wasn't humans versus climate, it was a much deadlier humans plus climate. Separately, either factor might have been survivable. Together, they were fatal. Large animals always have a harder time with rapid changes. They need massive territories, they reproduce slowly, and they rely on stable migration routes. Imagine a herd of mammoths trudging across a frozen plain. The snow is deeper than they've ever seen. The grass is out of reach, and waiting for them are humans who are also on the brink, which makes them strike harder and more accurately. A hunter looks at a mammoth and sees a massive risk, but also a massive reward. That's meat, fat, bone, hide, tools, fuel, and the very frame of a house. When an animal like that goes extinct, you don't just lose prey, you lose an entire set of possibilities. You also lose the landscape the mammoths maintained, the paths they trod, the brush they cleared, the soil they fertilized. The old world begins to shrink. It's hard not to see the parallels to our own time. Today, wildlife is under the same kind of pressure. Habitats are disappearing, the climate is shifting, pollution is rising. On top of that, you have hunting and poaching. Once again, it's not just one factor, but a combination. We call it the sixth mass extinction. It sounds scientific, but it's really just the same old story. The environment is deteriorating faster than living things can keep up. And that's where the impact theory comes back into the picture, not because it's been proven, but because it's just too compelling to ignore. A 2007 study caused a total firestorm in the scientific community. The authors weren't talking about a single strike, they described a rain of debris. Their theory was that a comet broke apart in space and its fragments slammed into the atmosphere over a massive area. This was their way of explaining why we haven't found one giant smoking crater. As evidence, they pointed to a layer of black matte at dozens of archaeological sites, high concentrations of charcoal, ash, nanodiamonds, and magnetic spherules, tiny particles that only form under extreme temperatures. On paper, it looked perfect. Maybe too perfect. The critics hit back hard. Other teams tried to find the same materials in the same layers. Some failed entirely. Others found them, but in much lower concentrations. Some even found these unique particles in layers that had nothing to do with the Younger Dryas. For a smoking gun theory, that's bad news. Then, in 2018, a new hope emerged. Researchers found a circular structure under a glacier in Greenland. It was about 19 miles, 31 kilometers wide, and looked exactly like an impact crater. The dating seemed to line up. Had they finally found it? This is where the story refuses to stay simple. A 19-mile, 31-kilometer crater is created by an object less than a mile, about 1 kilometer wide. Locally, that's a disaster. Globally, it's probably not enough to trigger something as massive as the Younger Dryas. If it was just one fragment of many, where are the others? Are they hidden under the ice, or have we just not found them yet? Every maybe takes us right back to square one. That's the core tension of the impact theory. The imagery is powerful. The sky on fire, continents burning, dust choking the atmosphere, and the megafauna collapsing. It's a perfect Hollywood script. But the more dramatic the claim, the stronger the evidence needs to be. Right now, there's no consensus, just suspicious materials, debated layers, and a candidate crater. Maybe we've spent too much time looking for one big nail to hang the whole Younger Dryas on.
Maybe the reality was more brutal because there wasn't just one cause. A little impact here, a little systemic failure there. Ice, ocean, atmosphere, and ecosystems all failing at once. If even the most exciting hypothesis is this shaky, what are we left with? That's when the theory that seemed too down to earth came back to the table. Lake Agassiz and the freshwater pulse. In 2020, a study of sediments in the Gulf of Mexico found traces of a massive freshwater influx about 13,000 years ago. According to this reconstruction, the water from Lake Agassiz originally drained south through the Mississippi Valley, but then the route shifted. As the ice retreated, the flood burst through the St. Lawrence Valley into the Atlantic. If this is true, the pieces fit together perfectly. The breach actually happened. It was a series of rerouted floods, a giant system of meltwater looking for an exit, finally hitting the exact spot where it would do the most damage. This wasn't a trickle, it was a surge capable of changing the ocean's salinity over such a huge area that the conveyor belt simply choked. This version is backed by geological traces, dating, and computer models. Most scientists now agree that this flood was a key factor, maybe not the only one, but certainly the first domino to fall. But was the flood enough on its own, or were there other accomplices involved? Accomplice number one, solar activity. Isotope reconstructions show that the sun was hitting a minimum that lasted for decades.
Solar radiation dropped by about 1 to 2%. That sounds like a rounding error, but if a system is already on the brink, a small nudge becomes a massive lever. The sun wasn't the driver, but it was a very effective amplifier. Accomplice number two, volcanism. We're not talking about one supervolcano, but a rapid-fire series of medium-sized eruptions. Ice core analysis shows several sulfate peaks in a row. Individually, they weren't world-ending. Collectively, that's a different story. Candidates have been found in Kamchatka, Alaska, the Andes, and Iceland. To understand the impact, look at the year without a summer in 1816. The Mount Tambora eruption in Indonesia, half a world away, meant that a farmer in Europe didn't get a summer. It snowed in July. Crops failed. Grain prices doubled. Livestock died. Whole villages were abandoned as people searched for food. Now, imagine several of those years in a row, stacked on top of a climate that was already breaking down. Put it all together. The lake flood kills the ocean current. The solar minimum strips away more heat. A series of volcanic eruptions blocks out the light from above. And if the impact theory is even partially right, you add fires and dust to the mix. You get a world that didn't just break, it was dismantled. If you are interested in the specific mechanics of how these factors interacted, I can dive deeper into the conveyor belt of the North Atlantic or the geological evidence found in the black mat layers. Which part of this climate puzzle should we look at next?
That's what a perfect storm looks like. It isn't a single bolt of lightning, it's an entire system. These kinds of explanations are actually more terrifying than the flashy ones. With a single cause, it's psychologically easy. You find the culprit, you close the case. But when you're looking at a cascade, you realize that disasters are often born from a freak coincidence of very real factors. This is currently one of the most plausible scenarios. The Younger Dryas was a moment when several factors pushed the climate past a critical threshold all at once. After that, positive feedback loops took over. More ice meant a higher albedo effect, basically the surface reflecting more sunlight back into space. The planet began reflecting more sunlight back into space. The system locked itself into a cold mode for about 1,000 years. First, you need the push. After that, the system helps the catastrophe sustain itself. If the start was that sudden, what finally ended it? The conclusion was almost scandalously fast. In just a decade, temperatures jumped by about 18 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius. Think about that, a decade, not 1,000 years of gradual warming, but a span of time a single person could experience and feel on their own skin. The ice began to retreat. So what flipped the switch back? One answer lies in long-term shifts of the Earth's position relative to the Sun. Scientists call them Milankovitch cycles, slow changes in the planet's tilt, the shape of its orbit, and precession, the slow wobble of the axis. These parameters shift over thousands of years, and about 11,700 years ago, they hit a sweet spot for summer warming in the northern hemisphere. More ice melts in the summer, albedo drops, the exposed surface absorbs more heat, the feedback loops start running in the opposite direction. The second answer is the recovery of the Oceanic conveyor belt. The freshwater flood from Lake Agassiz finally ran dry. With the lake empty, salinity levels began to recover. The water became dense enough to sink to the depths again. The conveyor rebooted, and with it, heat came rushing back to the north. There's a beautiful symmetry to it. Water broke the system. The absence of that water allowed it to stand back up.
Of course, it was likely a combination of both. The orbital cycles created the right background, the oceanic circulation responded, and the ice began to give way. The entire system snapped back into a warm state. The planet entered the Holocene, our current era. It's warm, relatively stable, and suspiciously convenient for life. This might be the most underrated fact in human history. For the last 11,700 years, the climate has been strikingly steady compared to the chaos that came before. Sure, we've had fluctuations, the medieval warm period, the Little Ice Age, regional droughts and crop failures, but none of those were 10 or 15-degree shifts. We haven't seen the global system violently thrash from one state to another. This stability is exactly what gave humanity the chance to reach its full potential.
Agriculture requires predictability. You have to know when to sow, when to expect rain, and when to harvest. In a chaotic climate of an Ice Age world, that's almost impossible. The Holocene gave us a window, and we've used it so aggressively that we're now shaking the very system that allowed us to become a civilization in the first place. This is where history stops being just the past. If the Younger Dryas is an example of how the climate can suddenly snap, the next question is inevitable. How real is the threat of a similar scenario in our lifetime? We're not talking about a literal return to the Paleolithic, but a new, sharp, systemic shift that would hammer the modern world. What would it take to trigger that, and how close are we to those conditions? The Greenland ice sheet is melting right now. Satellites show that on average it has been losing about 250 billion tons of ice per year over the last 2 decades. That number is staggering, but the real alarm isn't just the scale, it's the direction. Massive numbers can be numbing. You hear billions of tons, you nod, and you immediately lose a sense of the scale. But if we look at it more practically, the point is this. One of the planet's main refrigerators is losing its stability every year. And that meltwater is flowing directly into one of the most sensitive points in the entire climate system. This process is accelerating. All that fresh water is dumping into the North Atlantic. Right now, the volume isn't enough to trigger a Lake Agassiz moment overnight. But there's a key difference that makes our current situation even more insidious. Back then, it was a breach, a sudden burst. Today, it's a constant leak. The ancient flood was like a hammer blow. Modern melting is more like a support beam being slowly eaten away by rust. Everything looks fine for a long time. Then, one day, you realize the structural integrity is gone. Year after year, season after season, the salinity is dropping. The water is becoming less dense. The conveyor is slowing down. And this isn't just a theory anymore, it's a measured reality. The Rapid Array System, a network of buoys and sensors across the Atlantic, shows that the circulation has weakened by about 15 to 20% since 2004. Do you think we are approaching a definitive tipping point for the Atlantic circulation? Or is the system resilient enough to absorb these changes without a total collapse? To put it simply, we are living in an era where this massive oceanic engine is already showing signs of fatigue.
Not the cinematic, sensationalized kind, just measurable facts. 15%, 20%. It doesn't sound like the end of the world. But the problem with non-linear systems is that they look manageable right up until they hit a tipping point. After that, the shift isn't gradual, it's violent. The conveyor belt doesn't have to die a slow, polite death. It can weaken for a long time and then just snap. What happens then? Europe and the east coast of North America would start to cool down. Most models don't predict a Hollywood-style apocalypse.
They predict a drop in average temperature of about 5.4 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit, 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. On paper, that sounds manageable. In reality, it's devastating. The average regional temperature dictates a length of the growing season, the frequency of frosts, and crop stability. Winters get longer, summers get shorter, agriculture takes a direct hit. Regions that currently grow wheat and corn could become too cold or too unstable for those crops. Yields would drop. From there, the old, ruthless chain reaction begins. Food shortages, price spikes, and social unrest. And this would happen in a world of billions of people, not a few thousand hunters. We are a global society tied to logistics, markets, and political stability. Then come the migrations. If the north becomes less livable, people move south. But the south is already crowded and dealing with its own crises. Suddenly, a climate shift becomes a crisis of borders, refugees, and conflict. This isn't science fiction, it's a real-world risk. The probability isn't 100%, but it's certainly not zero. This raises an honest question. What can we actually do to avoid this? The first answer is obvious, which makes it incredibly difficult. Slow down global warming. The second is monitoring. We have to keep tracking the currents, the salinity, and the ice sheets. It doesn't fix the problem, but it gives us a chance to see the systems starting to break. Ultimately, the most realistic answer is adaptation. Not because it's a good solution, and certainly not because it's fair. It's because the Younger Dryas teaches us a harsh truth. The winner isn't the one who explains the problem best, it's the one who adapts before the environment hits them with full force. If the North Atlantic starts to cool significantly, we have to be ready. We need cold-resistant crops. We need more resilient power grids. We need to plan for food logistics and migration scenarios. None of this sounds heroic, but survival doesn't go to those who talk about risk. It goes to those who move faster than the crisis. The fundamental lesson of that ancient catastrophe is speed. We're used to thinking that climate change is slow, that species have centuries to migrate, and humans have generations to adapt. The Younger Dryas proved that's not always the case. Climate can flip in just a few years or a decade. In terms of evolution, that's an instant. For a human society, it's a heartbeat. Modern data backs this up. High-resolution ice cores and lake sediments show that during the last ice age, there were dozens of these sudden climate events. They're called Dansgaard-Ostya events. There were about 25 episodes of sudden warming where temperatures would jump 9 to 18 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 to 10 degrees Celsius in just a decade before sliding back. The Younger Dryas wasn't just a random freak occurrence, it was the system's last big gasp before settling into a more stable mode. So why has the Holocene been so steady? One answer is the ice sheets. They're smaller now and less volatile.
Another is the Earth's orbital parameters, which currently keep seasonal contrasts mild. The Holocene isn't magic, it's just a lucky equilibrium, a very lucky, very fragile one. This is why the Younger Dryas matters. It's not a museum horror story, it's a practical lesson. It shows that the planet doesn't always change gradually. Stability isn't a guarantee, it's a temporary phase. Even a massive climate engine can be shoved into a state that life really, really dislikes. And that leads to the heaviest question of all. If the climate can break the world that fast, how did the people of the past actually survive it? Because it's one thing to look at a chart, it's another thing entirely to live through it. This isn't just about the past. What's truly terrifying isn't a specific number, it's the unpredictability. If the climate moved slowly along a predictable path, we could at least build a long-term plan. But if the system can just flip a switch without a polite or lengthy warning, then the very idea of planning starts to fall apart, and our entire society is built on that foundation. You build a city because you believe the coastline is stable. You plant a specific crop because you trust the rhythm of the seasons. You invest in a region because you assume that 20 years from now the climate will be roughly the same. When those basic assumptions turn out to be false, it's not just one sector that fails. The entire logic of our world begins to crack. History has shown us time and again that even relatively small climate shifts can break entire civilizations. The Maya faced brutal droughts, so did the Akkadians. In Mycenaean Greece, drought and cooling likely played a major role in their collapse. During the late Roman period, the weather turned colder and wetter, leading to mass migrations, all hitting an empire already suffering from political exhaustion. But here's the crucial part. All of those shifts were weaker than the Younger Dryas. In some cases, we're talking about a temperature drop of just 1 or 2 degrees. In others, a 10 or 20% change in rainfall. By Ice Age standards, that's almost nothing. Yet it was enough to undermine the stability of massive societies. Why? Because civilizations almost never collapse for just one reason. They fall when climate stress hits a system already burdened by inequality, war, soil exhaustion, debt, elite infighting, corruption, and a reliance on fragile logistics. In these cases, climate is rarely the sole killer, but it is often an amplifier, a very cruel amplifier. We like to think modern civilization is tougher, and in a way, it's true. We have technology, global trade, instant communication, satellites, advanced modeling. If a harvest fails in one region, we can ship food in from another. If one country hits a crisis, it can, theoretically, be supported by outside resources. That's exactly why the modern world loves to think it's invulnerable. You look at a map of flight paths, container shipping routes, pipelines, and digital networks, and you can almost feel the power of the system.
It feels like a civilization this advanced couldn't possibly be shaken by the climate. But interconnectedness has a dark side. A hit to one node ripples through the others fast. The network's greatest strength is often its greatest weakness. The modern world is powerful because it's connected. That means it's vulnerable through those very same connections.
What happens if the changes aren't local but synchronous? What if several of the world's primary agricultural regions hit a wall at the same time, facing drought, heat, cold, or flooding all at once? Humanity's grain reserves aren't infinite. Usually, we only have enough for a few months of consumption, not years. We don't have a giant civilizational bunker. We have a few months. After that, the chain reaction is as old as time. Food shortages, price spikes, hunger, panic, and political instability. And hunger never travels alone. It brings everything else with it. Uprisings, migrations, violence, a total collapse of trust. History is full of this. Climate is rarely the only cause, but it piles on to an already strained system and makes managing it nearly impossible. This is where we see a very dark parallel with the Younger Dryas. Back then, people were victims of changes they didn't cause. The catastrophe just happened to them. All they could do was endure, adapt, migrate, and try to survive. Today, we are both the victims and the cause. We're changing the climate ourselves, and then we're terrified of the consequences. It's a twisted feedback loop. We push the system, and that momentum comes back to hit us in the form of instability, shortages, and conflict. But there is one major difference. Now we at least have the theoretical chance to be the solution, not just the problem. We have data, we have monitoring, the history of past disasters, models, and supercomputers.
We aren't blind like the Clovis people who could only stare at snow in June and wonder which god they had offended. We can see the threats coming. The Younger Dryas teaches us that climate is dangerous, but it also shows us the privilege of knowledge. We live in a world where satellites, ocean buoys, labs, and supercomputers track the planet's every move. That is a massive gift, but it's also a heavy sentence. If a civilization armed with this much knowledge still refuses to change course, then the problem isn't ignorance. The problem is our will and the way our system is wired. The catch is that seeing and acting are two very different things. In the real world, everything gets bogged down in special interests, inertia, and politics. Long-term threats almost always lose out to short-term gains. This is one of the most frustrating things about Younger Dryas logic in the modern world. The problem is massive, but it starts with things that seem manageable on their own. One more year of delay, one more compromise. In the moment, nothing seems to be collapsing. And that's exactly why society keeps acting like we have plenty of time.
The problem is that disasters like the Younger Dryas don't send a polite, convenient heads-up. They just start. By the time everyone finally realizes the situation is critical, the timeline has usually shrunk from several generations down to just a few years. We're standing at a crossroads. There's a dark scenario and a more mature one. In the dark scenario, the crisis tears everyone apart for good. In the mature one, it forces us to realize the threat is shared, that cooperation, as difficult as it is more profitable than collective self-destruction. Maybe humanity needs a new level of self-awareness for this, the realization that we aren't just a collection of states, but one species on a single life support system. It sounds almost utopian, But when the alternative is environmental degradation and a chain reaction crisis, even utopias start to sound practical. Then again, there are no guarantees. History is full of examples of the opposite. Think of the Roman Empire, Easter Island, the Maya. These were societies that saw, in various ways, that their environment was being stripped, their resources were running out, and their stability was crumbling, yet they kept pushing forward, almost right off the cliff. But let's go back to the Younger Dryas. There's a crucial side to this story that usually gets glossed over. What was happening outside the North Atlantic? The conversation almost always focuses on Europe, Greenland, and North America. That makes sense. The signal there was the sharpest, and we have the most data from those regions.
But the Younger Dryas was a global event, even if it looked different everywhere. In a way, that makes it even scarier. When a catastrophe hits everyone the same way, it's easier to recognize. But here, the planet didn't react uniformly. It reacted like a mosaic. In one place, it was cold. In another, a drought. Elsewhere, monsoons shifted or lake levels dropped. The planet wasn't screaming with one voice. It was whispering 100 different symptoms. If you were living through it in one specific spot, it would have been almost impossible to tell that these were all pieces of the same massive event. Global doesn't mean identical. Take Asia, for example. In China, paleoclimate data shows a cooling trend and a strengthening of winter monsoons. In Japan, there's Lake Suigetsu. It contains varves, annual layers of sediment that allow scientists to date events with near-surgical precision. Analysis of these layers shows changes in rainfall and water temperature that line up perfectly with the Younger Dryas. It's like a calendar where the climate left its signature. In India, the monsoons weakened. For a society dependent on those rains, that is a direct path to disaster. Fewer summer rains means the entire system breaks. Water supply, crops, seasonal predictability. The very ability to build a life around the rhythm of nature disappears. Even early primitive agriculture was put under immense pressure. A monsoon isn't just a rainy season, it's a pulse that the entire economy of the region is tuned to.
A weaker monsoon means less soil moisture, rivers that don't recharge, and livestock dying. It means total anxiety for people who depend on a few key weeks when the sky is supposed to do exactly what it's always done. Now look at Siberia. It got even colder, and the last northern populations of mammoths took another hit. Their home, the mammoth steppe, those cold, grassy plains, was already failing. The warming period before the Younger Dryas had been turning those grasslands into taiga and forests, which didn't suit mammoths well. You'd think the Younger Dryas returning the cold would help, but the environment didn't snap back to the way it was. This is a particularly cruel detail. You can bring the temperature back down, but the ecosystem isn't obligated to follow. The mammoths were caught between worlds. The old regime was gone, and the new one didn't fit. That is what a real ecological trap looks like. Finally, there's Africa. We have less detailed data from there, but the signs of major change are clear. Lake Victoria either dried up completely or dropped to incredibly low levels. Keep in mind, this is a massive lake. Its near disappearance points to a large-scale drought across East Africa. Animals wandered off in search of water. Humans followed. All of this was likely tied to the shifting of the ITCZ, the tropical rain belt, which moved because of the cooling in the northern hemisphere. A massive lake isn't just a spot of water on a map. It's the local climate, the fish, the migration routes.
When a system like that bottoms out, it's like a region losing its central organ. Everything tied to it, food, movement, the rhythm of life, is thrown into chaos. One powerful climate shift in the north can pull rain belts, monsoons, and water cycles across the entire planet. In the Earth's climate system, the ocean, the atmosphere, and tropical rain are far more tightly connected than we usually imagine. Now, let's look at South America. In the Andes, glaciers began to advance. Water levels in Lake Titicaca plummeted. The Amazon may have become drier, though the data there is still debated and isn't as clear-cut as what we see in the North Atlantic. Even Patagonia showed signs of a deep freeze. While the changes in Australia and New Zealand were less dramatic, the Southern Hemisphere was definitely not spared. This teaches us a vital lesson about connected world illusion. The planet isn't divided into an important center and a background. When the oceans, atmospheric belts, and energy balance shift in one major system, it sends shockwaves far beyond the starting point. It's tempting to just say, okay, so everything just got colder, but the reality was much more complex. Some places got colder, others got drier, some actually became wetter. In some regions, the signal was loud and clear. In others, it was subtle, almost debatable. It all depended on local conditions, proximity to the ocean, the terrain, and how specific wind patterns behaved. But all of these changes shared one common denominator: instability.
The climate stopped being a reliable backdrop. Seasons shifted. Rainfall patterns broke. Temperatures swung wildly. For plants, animals, and humans, it meant the same thing. You had to adapt constantly, with no idea what the next year would bring. Interestingly, the changes in the tropics were much milder. Equatorial regions are generally more resilient because they receive a massive, steady flow of solar energy year-round. The Younger Dryas affected them, sure, but not with the same scorched earth intensity seen in the northern latitudes. This meant tropical species and ecosystems had an easier time weathering the storm. This might be exactly why tropical biodiversity is so mind-blowingly rich today. In places where the climate doesn't swing to extremes, life doesn't just survive. It gets complicated. It branches out. In the north, the climate kept hitting the reset button on the entire system. In the tropics, many evolutionary lines were able to continue almost unbroken for millions of years. That's why losing a tropical species today is more expensive than it looks. When a species vanishes from a system that has been building complexity for eons, you aren't just losing a single leaf from the tree of life. You're tearing off an entire branch that evolution may never have the time to regrow. The Younger Dryas, at least, gave these systems the space to survive. We might not. Here is where the story takes a dark turn.
Just because the Younger Dryas didn't hit the tropics that hard doesn't mean they're invulnerable now. Modern changes, deforestation, global warming, shifting rain cycles, massive fires are hitting them full force.
If tropical forests are destroyed, that biodiversity won't disappear over millennia of climate swings. It will vanish in decades. Species that took millions of years to evolve could be gone in an evolutionary heartbeat. It's a bitter comparison. The Younger Dryas couldn't break the tropical core of life, but we can, with our own hands. It's a haunting thought. A prehistoric climate catastrophe with all its power didn't damage the tropics the way modern humanity does through logging, fire, and overheating. In a sense, we are now more dangerous to Earth's richest ecosystems than one of the most violent climate episodes of the late Pleistocene. That's a tough pill to swallow, but it's hard to argue with the facts. When you look at a rainforest, you don't just see a lot of trees, you're looking at an archive of millions of years of stability. These are species that survived the climate seesaw of the Ice Age and made it to us. Now their fate depends on a few decades of human greed and a global habit of turning everything into raw materials. This is why the Younger Dryas is more than just a scientific curiosity. It shows us not just that the climate can break the world, but how the world responds to the same blow. In one place, settlements are abandoned. In another, lakes dry up, monsoons falter, giants go extinct, and in some places, life holds the line and keeps building. If you want to truly understand these events, it's not enough to ask, did it get colder? You have to ask, who suffered? Where did the water go? Where did the prey disappear to? Which species reached their breaking point? Which territories became a sanctuary? What does a planet actually look like when its most reliable systems suddenly stop being reliable? This is where the story gets even deeper, because now we have to look past the weather and the people and focus on the very fabric of life, how ecosystems survive a knockout blow, how the memory of a catastrophe stays etched in the landscape, and why the scars of these ancient crises are still right beneath our feet. Before we venture into the forests and the ice, we need to look at the people, specifically what archaeology shows us, not through stories, but through physical evidence. Real people didn't leave us diaries about the Younger Dryas, but they did leave stone, bone, campsites, and trash. They left traces of their fires, their migration routes, and the specific spots where they tried to dig in and hold on. If you look at these things long enough, the picture starts to speak. Archaeology reveals that during the Younger Dryas, everything changed. Culture, technology, even where people chose to live. It wasn't one single dramatic theatrical collapse. Instead, it was a series of small practical decisions made under intense environmental pressure. Suddenly, people are settling in shelters more often. They're diversifying their hunting strategies. Their toolkits are no longer designed for a one big score. This is panic frozen in stone, humanity's struggle translated into material form. Let's start with Europe.
Late Paleolithic hunter-gatherer cultures across Europe show clear shifts in their tools and their homes. Before the Younger Dryas, people often camped in the open, near rivers and lakes. It makes sense. The water is right there, the prey is right there, and you can see for miles. Life was built on the assumption that the climate was, at least on average, predictable. But when the world gets colder and meaner, the logic of those open spaces starts to work against you. Open spaces look great on a map. They're terrible at holding heat. During the Younger Dryas, campsites shifted to protected zones, deep valleys, the bases of mountains, anywhere to hide from the wind, where the terrain itself helped you survive. This wasn't just a design preference, it was a survival choice. You weren't just picking a nice spot, you were deciding whether the fire would stay lit, whether the snow would bury you, and whether your children would make it through the night. To us, this shift sounds academic. To them, it meant admitting the old ways were dead, and that's always painful. A campsite isn't just a point on a map, it's a habit, a memory, a trail to water, a deep knowledge of the local animals. The Younger Dryas broke those invisible pillars that give people the feeling of, we know how to live here. The tools changed too. Stone points became smaller, thinner, and more diverse. On paper, this looks like a tidy chart in a textbook. In reality, it means the era of the big hunt was over. People relied less on taking down massive game and shifted towards smaller targets, rabbits, birds, and fish.
The world of mammoths and the long chase was replaced by the world of the generalist. It became a world where it was better to have a flexible toolkit than one impressive specialty. When the environment gets harsh and unpredictable, it's not the strongest or most elegant strategies that survive, it's the most plastic ones. This is why fishing became so much more important. We see bone harpoons, hooks, and evidence of nets like stone sinkers. Fish stopped being an occasional snack. They became a cornerstone of survival. Fishing requires a different rhythm, different techniques, a different kind of dependence on a location. If the big game leaves, the water becomes your lifeline. You aren't just following a herd anymore. You're learning to read the ice, the current, the depth, and the seasonal behavior of the fish. This meant culture had to be rebuilt, not just the tools, but the knowledge passed down to the next generation. It's a different kind of skill, not a sprint or a chase, but patience, enduring the freezing cold and waiting. At the same time, plants became a bigger deal. We find grinding stones, mortars, and the remains of seeds, nuts, and roots. People started eating everything they could find. When the world gets tough, humans start looking very closely at things they used to ignore. Where the big hunt fails, patience, gathering, and processing take over. Catastrophes teach you to value the scraps. Some campsites were simply abandoned. Entire regions that were once bustling fell silent. Populations pulled back into safe zones, along coastlines, into sheltered valleys, or near stable lakes.
On a map, it looks like migration. On the ground, it means something else. You leave your home not because you want to, but because the land can no longer hold you. The world was pushing people out of one zone and squeezing them into another. The Middle East is particularly fascinating because this is where the Neolithic revolution, the birth of farming, actually began. Before the Younger Dryas, the Natufian culture was thriving in the Fertile Crescent. People were already building permanent or semi-permanent settlements.
They were harvesting huge amounts of wild grains using sickles and grinding stones. It wasn't full-scale farming yet, but it was dangerously close. And then the Younger Dryas hit. It got colder, it got drier. The wild grains became scarce, their habitats shrank, and yields plummeted. The blow landed right on the doorstep of the future. These people had just started to trust their location. Suddenly, the environment proved that their habit of stability had been premature. Some settlements were abandoned, but other groups tried to dig in, refusing to give up their access to grain. This is where we see one of the most important pivots in human history. Under environmental pressure, people didn't just gather wild grains anymore. They began to intentionally intervene in the life cycle of the plants. They started sowing seeds, tending to them, and protecting them. You return to the spot where the yield was best. You save some grain, not to eat it, but to ensure it grows there again next year.
At first, this probably didn't feel like a great innovation. It was likely just a series of stubborn attempts to keep from being blindsided by hunger. But that's how major historical turning points often start, not as a triumphant project, but as a practical gesture against fear. When the Younger Dryas finally ended and the climate softened, these experiments stopped being a desperate gamble and became the foundation of a new world. Farming worked. It became the bedrock of the Neolithic revolution. Sometimes civilization isn't born from abundance, it's born from a refusal to accept scarcity. Now let's look at North America. As we discussed, the Clovis culture vanished at the start of the Younger Dryas. In its place, the Folsom culture emerged. Their spear points were different, smaller, more finely crafted, and their primary focus shifted from mammoths to bison. This wasn't just a change in Stone Age fashion, it was an adaptation to a new reality. By this time, mammoths were either extinct or incredibly rare. The old way of life, built around massive prey, simply didn't work anymore. When the game changes, everything else has to change with it. The tools, the tactics, the travel routes, and even what you expect from the landscape. Hunting a mammoth and hunting a bison aren't the same thing. They represent different worlds. The level of risk is different. The way you organize your group is different. The way you plan for winter is different. When the animal that anchors your entire existence disappears, a piece of your culture goes with it. The logic of life that had been trained into people for generations was suddenly gone. As you move south into Central and South America, the archaeological traces of the Younger Dryas are more subtle. Tropical and subtropical cultures continued to develop without such violent breaks. This supports the idea that the high latitudes took the heaviest hit. But even there, things were shifting. Tool types changed, settlements were reorganized, and diets evolved. People everywhere were reacting to the environment, even if the world wasn't collapsing quite as fast as it was in the north. There is another fascinating lead here, the population bottleneck. Genetic studies of modern Native Americans show relatively low genetic diversity. This suggests a massive population crash in the distant past. One of the prime suspects is the Younger Dryas. It's possible the population was decimated and later recovered, but that lost genetic diversity never came back. We see similar bottlenecks in other species, like mammoths and other megafauna. Genetic diversity tanked, populations fractured into isolated groups, and that is a death sentence.
When a large connected population breaks into tiny islands, every new blow hits harder. Disease, hunger, a bad harvest, a cold snap, it all hits these smaller groups with much more force. Humans, unlike many other species, proved to be incredibly resilient. Our flexibility, the ability to adapt culturally, use tools, share knowledge, and act as a collective gave us a massive edge. But that doesn't mean everyone made it. Some cultures vanished.
Some regions were left empty. Entire populations likely died out. The ones who survived were the ones who adapted best, happened to be in a lucky spot, or just caught a rare break. History, as always, is written by the survivors. We are the descendants of the people who made it through the Younger Dryas and every other filter before it. And that word, filter, is key. Every mass extinction and climate crisis is a filter. The species that pass through it continue, the ones that don't disappear. Humanity passed through that filter back then, but that doesn't give us a free pass for the next one. Now we have to talk about the most unsettling part of this entire story, the speed. The speed of change is the most dangerous trait of the Younger Dryas. Cold is bad enough, but cold that arrives too fast is a nightmare. It doesn't just take away your resources, it takes away your time to adapt. Greenland ice cores provide us with a climate record of staggering accuracy. Annual layers of snow, compressed into ice over millennia, trap tiny bubbles of ancient air. They hold dust, ash, and isotopes that act as temperature proxies. Analysis of these cores shows something truly shocking. At the start of the Younger Dryas, temperatures in Greenland likely dropped by 18 to 27 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. This is where the myth of slow-moving nature dies. In our minds, an ice age sounds like geological sluggishness, but the system is capable of hitting us within the span of a single human life. It didn't crawl, it snapped.
We are talking about years, not centuries, not millennia, years. Just stop for a second and think about that. Imagine the average annual temperature where you live drops by 18 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius in just 5 years. Every year is colder than the last. Summer starts to feel like spring. Spring feels like a never-ending march, and winter turns into a near-Arctic night. All of this happens in the time it takes for a child to go from first grade to middle school. For nature, this is a blink of an eye. For an ecosystem, it's a knockout blow that is almost impossible to prepare for. Trees live for decades, even centuries. They can't just pick up and leave. For a forest to move, a seed has to fall, take root, grow, and produce its own seeds. Only then, generation after generation, can a forest crawl towards a more suitable climate. That isn't a process that takes years, it takes centuries. In a 5-year span, a tree doesn't escape the cold. It stays exactly where it grew, and it dies right there. It's important to be blunt here, because the phrase, "the forest zone shifted," sounds too gentle. The forest didn't move, the old forest died. The new forest, if it appeared at all, grew much later and in a completely different place. Between those two events lies a gap where an entire ecosystem first loses its identity and then, if it's lucky, begins to rebuild. Forests likely died off en masse. The belt where trees could actually survive shifted south by hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles. But the trees themselves obviously didn't march along with that line.
They stayed in a world that no longer wanted them. First, you get a ghost forest of dead trees, then a graveyard of bare trunks, then tundra, and finally a polar desert. New forests eventually spring up further south, but they aren't the rescued old trees. They are new generations that still have to find their way there. Animals, of course, are more mobile. A deer can travel 1,000 miles in a few months. For birds, it's a matter of days. But the real question isn't whether you can leave. The real question is, where do you go? This shatters the comfortable illusion of migration. On a map, migration looks like a clean arrow. In real life, it's a war. You aren't moving into a vacuum, you're moving into a world that is already occupied, into someone else's food supply. Migration during a crisis is always a process of elimination, and almost always someone gets left behind. The obvious answer seems to be go south, but the south isn't empty. It has its own populations, its own predators, its own struggle for food and territory. Nobody is rolling out the red carpet for refugees. That means migration isn't a smooth slide across the map. It's a collision, it's competition, it's a thinning of the herd. And not everyone can make the trip. The young are weaker, the old are slower. The sick and injured often simply can't handle the road. They stay behind and they die. In the end, populations fracture. Some manage to escape, some stay. The connection between groups is severed. Genetic diversity tanks. Inbreeding goes up, and along with it, the resistance to disease and new stressors plummets. This is what biologists call the alley effect. When a population becomes too small, it starts sliding down a demographic and genetic spiral toward extinction. At that point, it doesn't even matter if the external conditions eventually improve. Sometimes the catastrophe ends long before its consequences do. The cold might retreat, the grass might return, but if there are too few females left, if the groups are too far apart, if one more bad season killed the young and the old didn't live long enough to breed again, there may be no way back. On the outside, things look easier, but inside the population, the extinction mechanism has already been triggered and it keeps spinning on its own. It seems this is exactly the trap the mammoths fell into. During the Younger Dryas, their numbers likely dropped below a critical threshold. Even after the climate softened again, they couldn't recover. There were too few individuals, the gene pool was too shallow, the populations were too disconnected. Sure, they hung on for a while. They lived on isolated spots like Wrangel Island, but they were remnants, shadows of the former world. They were late-stage, dwarf, heavily inbred versions of their ancestors, and even they finally vanished for good about 4,000 years ago.
This is why speed is everything. If changes happen slowly, species have time to adapt. If they happen fast, that time vanishes, and that is exactly what is so alarming today. Modern climate change is moving faster than almost any point in the last several million years. The current rate of warming is roughly 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 degrees Celsius per century. That might not sound scary to the ear, but for an ecosystem, it is massive. If the environment runs away faster than the life tied to it can follow, you don't get smooth adaptation, you get a rupture. Trees simply cannot migrate fast enough to keep up with the climate. A forest might shift its boundary by a few 100 feet a year, but the climate conditions it needs are moving miles ahead. The old forest stays in a climate it can no longer handle and dies. The new forest hasn't arrived yet. Animals face the same problem. Many species are strictly tied to mountains, islands, or specific patches of forest, and their migration routes are blocked by cities, highways, farms, fences, and dams. You can tell an animal to move with the climate, but if there's an 8-lane interstate and a sprawling metropolis in the way, it's not a migration anymore. It's a trap. This is perhaps one of the most unsettling differences between our world and the world of the Younger Dryas. Back then, the planet was brutal, but it still had vast, continuous spaces. Today, we've carved it into pieces. We tell nature to adapt while simultaneously removing the very corridors it needs to do so. It gets even intense.
Climate isn't a linear thing. It's a web of tensioned connections. One shift triggers a second, and the second amplifies a third. This is exactly what scientists are watching for today. Signals from the oceans, the ice caps, and the permafrost. They're looking for tipping points, places where the system can flip into a new mode and never look back. That's how the Younger Dryas worked. A lake outburst weakened the conveyor belt, the North Atlantic cooled, and the system got jammed in a cold loop for 1,000 years. No one likes living with the feeling that their familiar world might be less stable than it seems. But the Younger Dryas cures us of that naive faith in gradual change. It speaks across the millennia, telling us the system can switch fast, the consequences can last a very long time, and by the time everyone finally agrees that something serious has started, the momentum is already working against us. And yet, this isn't a death sentence. Unlike the people of the Younger Dryas, we aren't just victims of a random glacial whim. We are also agents who influence the system. That is the source of all our terror and all our hope. One of the most dangerous human habits in the climate conversation is this. If a catastrophe doesn't feel like a punch to the face right now, our brains file it under "deal with it later." But the climate doesn't do well with delays. It loves inertia. It loves accumulation. It loves processes that seem manageable for a long time until they've suddenly gone too far.
The Younger Dryas offers us another perspective here. Crises don't just destroy, they also rebuild. Sometimes by force, sometimes cruelly. Sometimes in a way where a whole new era grows out of the adaptation. After the Younger Dryas, the Mesolithic begins in Europe, the Middle Stone Age. It sounds like a dry textbook term, but look closer and it's the story of how humans learned to live in a world after losing their most basic foundations. Big game no longer plays the lead role. The landscapes are different. The forests are returning. There is water everywhere. Resources are distributed differently. And humans didn't respond with one single great innovation. They responded with a cascade of practical adjustments. Tools became smaller, thinner, more specialized. We see the rise of microliths, tiny stone inserts that could be set into wooden shafts or composite tools. At first glance, it's a minor detail, just a sliver of flint. But in reality, it represents a very grown-up logic of survival. By making tools composite, you save material. You can replace a single damaged segment instead of the whole tool. You get flexibility, repairability, speed. This is a classic Mesolithic trait, not a grand gesture, but a smart adaptation. Bows and arrows started to play a much bigger role. In a forested world of fast, mobile prey and birds, the bow provided a completely different set of advantages. You no longer had to bet everything on one dangerous encounter with a massive beast. You could work with more precision, more stealth, and more flexibility. This shows how the psychology of survival itself changed. The world after the Younger Dryas taught people not to put all their eggs in one basket. It taught them to distribute their risk. Fishing followed the same path. When archaeologists find massive shell middens, ancient trash heaps of shells at a Mesolithic site, they're looking at a ledger of survival. Humans learned how to squeeze more than one type of food out of the landscape. Protein didn't just come from a hunt on land. There was the water, there was fish, shellfish, seasonal migrations of birds, nuts, seeds. The secondary resources became the foundation. This is why these cultures became quite successful. Populations grew again, humans occupied more territory. But alongside this, something even more radical was slowly simmering: farming. We've touched on the Natufians and how climate stress may have pushed some groups to manage wild grains more aggressively. Now we need to see the next step in full perspective. Farming isn't just a new way to get food, it's a fundamental shift in our relationship with the world. A hunter-gatherer follows the resource. A farmer tries to make the resource stay put. The hunter depends on movement. The farmer depends on staying anchored. The hunter reads the landscape. The farmer begins to rewrite it. This is a civilizational U-turn. And it wasn't as romantic as we often imagine. In the short term, an early farmer was often more vulnerable than a mobile hunter-gatherer. You were tied to a specific field, a specific cycle, and a specific harvest.
If disaster struck, you couldn't just move a few hills over. You had already invested. You had already built. Farming gave us power and fragility at the same time. The power came from producing more food per acre, accumulating surpluses, and supporting specialists and craftsmen. The fragility came from the fact that a single crop failure became a blow to the entire system at once. This is a vital lesson for us today. The more complex a society becomes, the greater its power, but also the greater its number of dependencies, and those dependencies can all start hurting at the same time. The Younger Dryas likely both delayed and accelerated the transition to farming. While the climate was unreliable, betting everything on crops was terrifying. But that very stress may have forced some groups to work more closely with plants, seeds, and specific growing sites. When the Younger Dryas finally ended and the Holocene brought stable conditions, these hard-earned practices were ready to explode into full force. Crisis teaches, stability scales what was learned. Humans enter a period of stability carrying a backpack full of forced experiments.
If the environment finally stops twitching, that baggage begins to yield a fantastic return. That is exactly what happens in the Holocene. The Fertile Crescent, later the Indus Valley, the Yellow River Basin, Mesoamerica, the Andean regions. In different parts of the world, humans independently began domesticating plants and animals. It wasn't because everyone suddenly got smarter at the exact same moment.
It was because the conditions finally converged: accumulated skills, population growth, advantageous species, local traditions, and, critically, a more predictable climate. That is the word that decides everything here: predictability. Agriculture hates climatic chaos. It loves a season that can be roughly anticipated. It loves a spring that actually feels like spring. It loves an interval where seeds know exactly when to sprout. It loves a world where one unexpected jump doesn't erase a whole year's labor. The Younger Dryas wasn't that world. The Holocene was. There's another factor: population growth. Once the Younger Dryas ended and conditions improved, the population began to rise. But hunting and gathering, as flexible as they are, have a natural productivity ceiling. Any given territory can only feed a certain number of people with those technologies. When the population hits that ceiling, you either have to move or intensify food production. Agriculture offers that second path. You put more labor into a plot of land, you get more calories, you support more people. Those people then create even more pressure on the land, and the system spins up, just like a climate loop, only in the cultural realm.
Those people then create even more pressure on the land, and the system pushes itself forward. A social feedback loop emerges. More food feeds more people. More people demand more food. More land is cleared for fields. More fields lock in the agricultural way of life. The process spins up just like a climate loop, only in the cultural realm.
There's a solid theory that helps us see this transition more clearly without the myth of a sudden revolution out of nowhere: the broad spectrum revolution.
According to this theory, humans first began using an increasingly diverse set of resources: small game, fish, shellfish, seeds, nuts, tubers, and seasonal plants. This isn't farming yet, but it is a school for attention, processing, storage, planning, and tool specialization. You learn not to place one giant bet, but a multitude of small, reliable sources. Cultivation grows much easier from this soil. It isn't a leap across a chasm, it's the next step on a well-trodden path. Managing wild plants slides into cultivating them. Gathering turns into tending to a patch of land. Tending turns into clearing, sowing, and selective breeding. Then another positive loop kicks in. Farming creates a surplus. Surplus supports permanent settlements. Settlements allow for the building of granaries and social structures, and those structures protect and expand the farming itself. A few thousand years after the Younger Dryas, this logic changed the face of the planet. Villages appeared, then cities, labor specialization, trade, hierarchies, states, writing, taxes, war on a new scale, temples, archives, imperial ambitions.
This entire colossal machine of civilization rests, in a sense, on one original gift: a stable enough climate that allowed agriculture to not just exist, but to take root. And here is the question that sends a chill down your spine. What if that stability was the exception? If you look at the climate record of the last few tens of thousands of years, the picture quickly cures you of any illusions. The Ice Age world was anything but quiet. It was riddled with violent swings, Dansgaard-Oshka events, rapid warming, sudden crashes. The Younger Dryas looks less like a freak occurrence and more like the final booming chord of that nervous climate. Then comes the Holocene, and what do we see? About 11,000 years of relative stability. Not absolute stability, of course. There were droughts, regional shifts, and little ice ages. But compared to the jagged drama of the late Pleistocene, it was nearly peaceful. This is why this topic matters so much. We didn't just build our world on the Earth. We built it on a very specific, very rare version of the Earth. We've become so used to it that we've stopped noticing the gift. Stability feels like the default background, but the Younger Dryas whispers the opposite. This isn't the norm. This is a fragile window. Why was the Holocene so peaceful? There are a few theories. One theory is that the giant ice sheets of the Ice Age had finally vanished from most of the northern hemisphere. These massive walls of ice aren't just passive lumps of frozen water. They flow, they crack, they retreat, they dam up lakes, they burst, and they shift the planet's albedo. In short, they are massive engines of instability. When there's less ice, the system loses one of its primary chaos machines. Greenland and Antarctica remain, of course, but the overall configuration is different. It's less jumpy. It's less prone to the kind of catastrophic flicks of the switch that defined the late Pleistocene. There is also an orbital logic. The Earth doesn't just circle the Sun in a perfectly static loop.
The tilt of the axis, the precession, and the shape of the orbit shift in long-term Milankovitch cycles. These changes redistribute solar energy across seasons and latitudes. In the grand scheme of things, these cycles help trigger and end ice ages. It's possible that the combination of orbital conditions at the start of the Holocene created a window where sharp fluctuations simply became less likely. But we shouldn't pretend we have one single explanation button. The system is complex. The causes are intertwined. However, even without perfect clarity, the main takeaway is powerful. Our entire civilizational experience grew inside an unusually stable climate regime. And now we are shoving that system with all our might. This is where the realization gets uncomfortable. If the Holocene really was a rare window of peace, then playing with its settings isn't just messing with the weather. It is an attempt to rattle the very foundation that allowed for agriculture, cities, trade, statehood, and the sheer complexity of the modern world. The circle closes. The Younger Dryas taught us how terrifying instability can be. The Holocene gave us a breather and allowed civilization to flourish. And now, the civilization born inside that breather is pushing the system toward a new era of chaos. There is a tragic irony here. We are the children of a climate winning streak, acting as if that streak is a universal right.
Maybe the most adult conclusion from this story isn't scientific, it's moral. When you realize how much of human success is owed to a quiet background, it's harder to remain arrogant.
Technological power doesn't cancel out our basic dependence on Earth's systems. We are still sitting on the same planet. We still depend on water, soil, predictable seasons, stable coastlines, and the functioning of the oceans. We've simply lived in a lucky chapter for so long that we've started to confuse it with the end of the book. That is a dangerous mistake. If the Holocene stability was a special window, and if feedback loops can accelerate the system toward tipping points we can't see coming, then the next question isn't about the past. It's about us. How deeply is modern civilization tied to this fragile climate comfort? And what starts to crack first when that comfort disappears? To answer that honestly, we have to look past the graphs. We have to go down to the dirt and the forest, to the tundra, the water, and the bones, to the places where climate stops being a line on a diagram and becomes something very concrete, an empty nest, a dead trunk, a vanished fish, or a hungry predator appearing somewhere it's never been seen before. That's when the Younger Dryas gets truly scary. It stops looking like 1,000 years of cold and starts looking like a massive rewriting of the living world. It wasn't instantaneous and it wasn't the same everywhere, but it was deep enough that entire ecosystems, communities of plants, animals, soil, and water lost their logic. They rebuilt themselves in poorer, harsher, and less generous forms. Take a specific scene, modern-day Germany. Today, it's forests, fields, roads, and cities. A green, inhabited world. But during the Younger Dryas, it was like another planet. A cold tundra steppe, bare earth, wind, permafrost. Summer was short, weak, and erratic. Only the top layer of soil would thaw, and in that narrow window, all of life's urgency was squeezed in. Mosses, dwarf grasses, and rare flowers had to sprout, bloom, and seed before the cold returned. The air was dry and sharp. It smelled of cold earth and snowmelt. Life was there, but it was stretched thin. Reindeer followed patches of vegetation. Musk oxen dug dry grass out from under the snow. Arctic foxes trailed lemmings. Wolves trailed the herds. Snowy owls watched for any movement on the ground. It was a functioning ecosystem, but a brutal one. Low diversity, few levels of complexity, and no reserves. A world stripped down to the bare minimum. Because it had fewer connections, the web was easier to tear. And remember, the picture was different before this. Forests of pine, birch, and willow once grew here. There were wild boars, deer, bison, bears, lynx, and forest birds. All of that didn't just change, it collapsed. A tree that took 100 years to grow can't just walk away. It stands and waits. The roots freeze deeper than ever before. The growing season shrinks. Tissues are shredded by frost, and eventually, in one bad year, it simply dies where it stands. A few years later, the landscape becomes a ghost forest, something that looks like a forest from a distance, but no longer lives. Dead trunks, shattered crowns, silence where there used to be rustling and chirping. Your eyes recognize the shape of a forest, but the machinery inside is broken. There's no humidity, no shade, and the vital work of fungi and insects has ground to a halt. As the trees fall, the animals follow. Bison shift toward whatever patches of vegetation remain. Wild boars head south, but they run straight into fierce competition. A forest bird doesn't live in the climate in a general sense. It lives in a specific architecture of branches, insects, and nesting hollows. When the forest vanishes, the architecture vanishes. You can't just transplant that life into the tundra and expect it to work. The Younger Dryas did this across the board, from Europe to North America, through the forest fringes and across the steppes. A complex, productive system gave way to something simpler, harsher, and far less diverse. When it comes to the ocean, our intuition often fails us. The ocean seems so vast that we assume it's invincible, too big for a crisis to change it quickly. But marine biology doesn't care about size. It depends on the fine-tuning of temperature, light, salt, and timing. During the Younger Dryas, the North Atlantic chilled rapidly. Ice pieces pushed far to the south. Where the physics of the water change, the biology follows. Cold water fish like cod expanded their range. Warm water species retreated. A climate strike almost never hits everyone equally. It reshuffles the winners and losers. But the web starts with the smallest players, the plankton. If the temperature, ice, and seasons shift, the composition of the plankton shifts too. The blooming periods move. And this is where it gets truly cruel. Imagine a fish whose larvae are timed to hatch during a narrow window when plankton hits its peak. If that peak shifts by 2 weeks, but the fish's biological cycle doesn't, the hatchlings emerge into empty water. There's no food. Mortality rates skyrocket in a single season. This is how climate rewrites life, not just through raw temperature, but through rhythm. Higher up the chain, the effects ripple. Fish change their migration routes, whales follow the fish, and seabirds lose their feeding grounds. A seagull doesn't just need a cliff to nest on, it needs fish within flying distance. If the fish leave, the colony goes silent, even if the cliff is still there. The form remains, but the function is gone. What about the coral reefs? A healthy reef is as vibrant as a garden. Dozens of fish species, octopuses, mollusks, all moving and feeding within the living coral. But after a few years of extreme stress, the coral expels its algae and turns bone white. The garden becomes a graveyard. The Younger Dryas hit reefs through sea level shifts and water chemistry. Today, we hit them direct with heat. The mechanism is different, but the result is the same. Then there's the level that seems cut off from everything, the deep ocean. It's dark, cold, and slow. You'd think it could be left in peace, but deep-sea communities feed on marine snow, dead plankton, and organic bits drifting down from above. If productivity changes at the surface, life at the bottom starves. It's like a high-rise building. The top floors are noisy and change first, but if you cut off the supplies at the lobby, the basement dwellers don't stay safe just because it's quiet down there. What happens when the Younger Dryas finally ends? Many people make an intuitive mistake here. They think
If the climate warmed up quickly, life must have bounced back just as fast. It almost never works that way. A climate line on a graph can shoot up in a matter of years. An ecosystem cannot repair itself at that speed. It needs time for species to migrate, for populations to recover, for food webs to restitch themselves, and for soil to rebuild. It needs new generations of trees, the return of pollinators, and the accumulation of organic matter. A forest doesn't turn on like a light bulb. It returns in generations, marching from south to north, one step at a time. Seed, sapling, mature tree, new seeds. Only then can the line move forward. This is why the regreening of Europe after the ice took thousands of years. Birch, willow, and pine often led the way. These are pioneer species, the first to colonize empty spaces because they are less picky and can handle poor soil and unstable conditions. Only much later could the hardier, more complex communities of oak and beech move in. If you destroy a complex system quickly, don't expect to see it recover at the same speed. The return isn't a carbon copy of the past, it's a new assembly. Some niches are reclaimed by the old residents, some are taken by newcomers, and some remain empty forever. If a species goes extinct, the warming won't bring it back out of politeness. The woolly mammoth didn't return just because the grass grew back.
An extinct species isn't an actor who stepped off stage for a break. It's a role that has been permanently deleted. That's why the world after a crisis almost never matches the world before it. It may be green, it may be productive, and it may even look healthy, but the internal logic is fundamentally different. That is exactly the point we need to burn into our memory. People often comfort themselves with the thought that nature will recover, but the real question is, what exactly will recover? In what form? And will that new world be one that can actually support a species like us? Evolution isn't a museum conservator. It's not obligated to bring back a familiar set of species. If conditions change abruptly, evolution doesn't respond with a polite repair. It responds with a total reconfiguration. Sometimes it's poorer, sometimes it's stranger. Often it's far more dangerous. The Younger Dryas left a mark that goes deeper than soil. It left a mark in DNA. When a population experiences a sharp crash, it loses more than just individuals. It loses potential futures. A huge chunk of genetic diversity vanishes. Along with it goes the ability to adapt to new diseases or environmental shifts. This is a blow you don't see with your eyes during the crisis, but it's the thing that finishes a species off long after the weather clears. This is the bottleneck effect. The wide river of life is squeezed into a narrow pipe. Only a few make it through. Later, the population grows again from that tiny remnant. The number of bodies returns, but the genetic richness does not. We see these scars in many species.
The European bison has incredibly low genetic diversity. Almost all living individuals have nearly identical DNA. At some point, the population was squeezed to the absolute minimum. It recovered, but it never regained its breadth. The Younger Dryas was likely one of those episodes that shoved the bison through the pipe. With mammoths, it's even darker. The last populations show signs of heavy inbreeding and the accumulation of harmful mutations. In a large population, a bad mutation gets filtered out. In a small one, it gets stuck and multiplies. At that point, extinction isn't just ecological. The system is rotting from the inside out, even if the animal is still walking. Climate isn't just a thermometer, it's a map of moving air. During the Younger Dryas, the jet stream likely shifted southward. Northern regions fell under a heavy Arctic influence. This wasn't a story of getting colder everywhere. It was a story of atmospheric geometry rewriting the pattern of life. Imagine living in a region where for centuries rain arrived at a specific time and now it comes at another or not at all. For a modern civilization, that's a crisis. For a small Paleolithic community, it's the difference between a year of adaptation and a year of collapse. How do we know all this? Where are the receipts? The Younger Dryas didn't just leave dead forests and disappeared cultures, it left physical evidence. This is where it turns into a detective story, slow, cold, and meticulous. The evidence is everywhere if you know how to look. Ice cores, tiny bubbles of air trapped in Greenland and Antarctica, act as time capsules of the ancient atmosphere.
Varves, annual sediment layers in lakes, like Lake Suigetsu, that work like tree rings for the entire planet. The black mat. In North America, there is a distinct dark layer of organic-rich soil found at many archaeological sites. Below it, you find mammoths and Clovis tools. Above it, they are gone. Pollen records. Fossils of pollen in peat bogs tell us exactly when the oaks died and the grasses took over. We are reading a crime scene that is 12,000 years old. And the most chilling part of the investigation is realizing that the victim wasn't just a few species of animals, it was the entire stability of the world as it was then known. We've learned that recovery isn't symmetrical to destruction. It breaks fast, it assembles slowly. Much is lost. Not everything returns. And what does return often operates by entirely new rules. We like to think of recovery as a reset button, but life doesn't have a reset button. It only has a next version. Sometimes better, sometimes worse, but almost never the same. What do you think is the most fragile link in our current version of the world? The one thing we assume is stable, but that the Younger Dryas warns us could flip in a heartbeat. Scientists can't hop into a time machine. They have to play detective, cross-referencing independent witnesses. They look for a unison in the signal. Does the data from an ice core, that long cylinder of ancient ice pulled from a glacier, match the story told by lake sediments, pollen analysis, the ocean floor, or archaeological strata? Standing in a warm lab today, you try to hear a world from 12,000 years ago through a bubble of air, a speck of dust, or a flaked flint once held by a human hand. The past doesn't offer a straight narrative, it leaves scraps. The power of science lies in the discipline not to invent more than what is in those scraps, yet not to miss the profound meaning hidden within them. When different sources start saying the same thing, the picture gains weight.
This is a very adult form of knowledge, not a sudden revelation or a single silver bullet piece of evidence, but a slow build of trust as one faint trail meets a second, a third, and a fourth. And in this detective story, there is one particularly dramatic character: dust. Dust is easy to dismiss as something mundane, but in climate history, dust is a force. During the Younger Dryas, the atmosphere was thick with it. Ice cores show a sharp spike in wind-blown particles from far-off lands. This forces us to ask, why did the world suddenly become so dusty? The answer is grim, because the earth was exposed. Where plants once anchored the soil, the ground lay bare. Cold, drought, and the collapse of ecosystems stripped away the green cover, giving the wind a perfect surface to work with. Imagine vast landscapes where the grass has vanished, the roots have withered, and the topsoil has dried to powder. A strong wind rises, and the world begins to tear itself apart, scattering its own substance into the air. These particles travel thousands of miles, settling in ice, in oceans, and in the lungs of everything living.
It would have been a visceral experience, air that crunches between your teeth, a horizon that blurs before you even realize why. Clothes, hair, and skin gradually coated in what was until recently someone's pasture or grassland. This isn't just dirty air, it's a climate signal that participates in the disaster it represents. Dust partially blocks sunlight. It affects how the surface heats up. It can change cloud patterns because water vapor clings to these tiny particles. A feedback loop forms. Cold and dryness kill vegetation. Bare soil releases dust. Dust alters light and clouds. This helps the cold persist. The world doesn't break according to one clean diagram. It breaks in knots. Pull one thread and the rest tighten. While the dust swirled, real people were living through it. This brings us back from the ice to the archaeological sites, specifically to the Near East, not because it suffered the most, but because the Younger Dryas hit right as our species was making one of its most pivotal turns. Take Abu Huraira in modern-day Syria. This is a multi-layered site where the Earth holds several different worlds stacked on top of each other. In the layers preceding the Younger Dryas, we see a settled community. People are actively gathering wild grains, wheat and barley. The village looks stable. It isn't a temporary camp, it's a place people rely on. This is the magic of stratigraphy, reading the layers. You literally watch a single plot of land change character over time. Deep down, there is trust in the land. A little higher, there is anxiety, then movement, then a cautious return.
When the Younger Dryas arrives, the middle layers tell a story of retreat. The traces of grain diminish. The bones of hunted animals increase. People become more mobile again. It looks like a regression, a step back into the old ways. Archaeology is powerful precisely because of its dryness. It doesn't write, "These people were afraid," but you feel it between the lines. Every shift in the ratio of bone to seed represents a high-stakes decision. These were people who had almost begun to trust a specific rhythm, almost started building a life around a single place. And then the world itself said, "Not yet." This leads me to think about our current version of the world.
We have built a global civilization on the ultimate form of trust in the land, industrial agriculture, global supply chains, and fixed coastal infrastructure. What do you think is the most fragile link in our current world? Is it our dependence on specific breadbasket regions, our fixed cities that cannot move when sea levels rise? Or perhaps something less visible, like the legal and economic systems that assume the background of nature will never fundamentally change? Later, in the upper layers, once the Younger Dryas finally releases its grip, we see the pendulum swing back. Active work with grains returns, but this time it's not just gathering. We start seeing signs of actual selection. The seeds are getting larger. The settlement leans toward stability again. The houses look more substantial, more permanent.
There is an almost perfect human drama in this loop. First, a move towards stability, then a massive blow, a forced retreat, and finally a new approach. But it's not naive anymore. This time it carries the memory that the world can change its mind at any moment. The crisis didn't kill the trajectory. It disrupted it, twisted it, and delayed it, but it didn't cancel it. These people survived the blow and returned to the experiment, only they weren't quite the same people anymore. When you look at the Younger Dryas through a site like this, it stops being just a story about the climate. It becomes a story about a future interrupted, a future that broke through anyway. There's another incredibly powerful example. Göbekli Tepe. It doesn't date directly to the peak of the Younger Dryas, but it appears shortly after, emerging into a world that had just endured a massive, prolonged period of climatic stress. It's a monumental complex with enormous stone pillars and intricate animal carvings. And the most shocking thing isn't just its age, it's who built it. It wasn't an empire, it wasn't a city-state. It was hunter-gatherers. People we've spent far too long imagining as much more primitive than they actually were. This is where the Younger Dryas casts a long shadow. After a world that had been unstable for so long, we suddenly see communities capable of organizing, negotiating, and pouring incredible labor into something symbolic, collective, and almost cosmic in its ambition. Why? For ritual? Memory? Fear? Gratitude? Was it an attempt to anchor a new order while it was still fresh and fragile?
In moments like these, it becomes clear that crises don't just strip life down to food and shelter. Sometimes they sharpen the hunger for meaning. We don't have a definitive answer, but the question itself is vital. It reminds us that climate shocks don't just change diets and migration routes, they change the inner world of the human being. In North America, the picture is different, but the core tension is the same. The Clovis culture disappears, the people do not. This is a crucial distinction. Archaeology often reveals a more complex reality. A specific cultural form vanishes, a specific style of tools, a specific logic of hunting, but the people themselves keep living, reshaping themselves to fit a new world. After Clovis comes Fossum, then other cultures, other projectile points, other strategies. This too is survival. It's just survival at the cost of transformation. The Topper site in South Carolina is fascinating in this regard.
There you find a Clovis layer, then a layer of dark organic material, the so-called black mat, and above that a completely different cultural horizon. These specific spots are the battlegrounds for massive scientific debates. The black mat looks like a smoking gun for a great drama, a dark gap, a shift in the layers. Some say it's the signature of a major impact, fires, and a sudden crisis. Others argue it's just a natural process from a swamp or soil buildup. The past rarely leaves a signed confession. It gives us material, and the rest is interpretation.
But despite the debates over the why, one thing is certain: the transitions happened. Cultures changed. Populations likely dipped. For many regions, the Younger Dryas was a human catastrophe, not just an inconvenient weather report. We're talking about disappearing camps, broken lineages, and children growing up in a world stripped of its old certainties. How many people died? It's one of the most difficult and sensitive questions to answer. We can't exactly run a Paleolithic census. We can only estimate based on proxy data how many sites there are, the density of artifacts, changes in diet, and what genetic models tell us. Back then, the entire planet might have only held a few million people. But small worlds have their own brutal arithmetic. If a large modern society loses part of its harvest, it can redistribute resources. A tiny Paleolithic group doesn't have that luxury. One failed season, one winter that lasts too long, and you're not looking at temporary hardships. You're looking at the risk of the entire chain of generations simply snapping. Locally, the losses could have been staggering. Maybe 30% perished, maybe half. But these are estimates, not hard data. This is why, in these eras, it's not just campsites that vanish, it's cultural worlds. And a cultural world is always bigger than a toolkit. It's the way you remember the path. It's how you tell your children why they can't do what their grandfather did. When a world like that dies, an archaeologist just sees a missing layer in the dirt. But for the people living through it, it was the collapse of an entire internal universe.
There is one more poignant detail: art. During the Younger Dryas, archaeological traces of art become scarce, perhaps because the pressure of survival eats up the space for symbolic luxury. When a group is on the brink of starvation, it's harder to spend energy on things that don't put food on the table today. After the Younger Dryas, art returns, but it has a different face. Fewer grand cave scenes, more geometry, signs, and engravings. It's the footprint of a deep internal reconstruction. It's as if imagination itself changed its gait. Then a stranger question arises. Could the memory of the Younger Dryas have survived long enough to leak into our myths? I'm not talking about a precise news report. I mean a distant echo. Some mythologists believe that stories of the Great Frost, the Great Flood, or fire falling from the sky might be the lingering resonance of ancient catastrophes. Now, we have to be careful here. Myth is fluid. But imagine if deep within a legend there is a tiny trace of an ancient terror, unrecognizable, covered in layers of gods and monsters, but still alive. It's almost impossible to separate a genuine ancient core from thousands of years of storytelling. It's a fascinating area of study, but it's not exactly solid ground. And yet it teaches us something. Ancient peoples passed down the memory of a collapsing world through images and rituals. We pass it down through graphs, peer-reviewed articles, and computer models. The medium has changed, but the nerve is the same.
The drive to recognize danger early enough so that it doesn't find us completely silent. This is where the story of the Younger Dryas stops being just archaeology and starts being a conversation about us today, about science, politics, and the cost of hesitation. An ancient crisis doesn't give us a manual, but it provides a frame, a warning, a sense of scale, and it offers the most uncomfortable but useful realization of all. The Earth is in no obligation to be convenient for our civilization. Imagine a person today in 2026 reading about the Younger Dryas over a cup of coffee. They wake up in a city where water comes through a pipe, food arrives by truck, and electricity flows through a grid. The heating season ends in April. The harvest in a supermarket doesn't seem to depend on what kind of summer they're having in Kansas or what storms are brewing over the Atlantic. It doesn't depend on them as long as the system holds. Most of their life is silently borrowed from a stable world they don't even notice. That's what normal looks like. But we only see it that way because we've forgotten how rare it is. We were born inside the Holocene, and we've grown accustomed to treating its mildness as a natural right. The Younger Dryas brings back the memory. Beneath the calm surface, there has always been a system capable of flipping a switch. And here comes the first big temptation. Some say, well, if the climate snapped on its own before, then today's changes are just another natural cycle. It's a trick that sounds convincing until you look at the causes. Yes, in the past, the climate changed without human input, but that doesn't mean today's spike isn't on us. If your house burned down once because of a lightning strike, it doesn't mean you can ignore the smoke today while someone is pouring gasoline on the floor.
Modern warming is happening alongside a massive surge in carbon dioxide and methane, changes in land use, fossil fuel combustion, and deforestation. This changes the moral weight of the conversation. When the Younger Dryas hit our ancestors, they were hostages. We are different. We still depend on the system, but we're also the ones leaning on the scale. For the first time, the victim and the source of the risk are the same species. The Younger Dryas isn't an excuse for inaction. It's a lesson in what the climate is capable of if you push it hard enough. There's also the opposite temptation, pure panic. The idea that one ancient episode provides a perfect prophecy of tomorrow. But history doesn't repeat itself mechanically. Today, we have a different atmospheric composition, different ice sheets, and a different ocean configuration. And most importantly, we have us. A species that doesn't just live inside the system, but consciously alters it. We are dangerous than our ancestors, but we're also better armed. We have satellites, ice cores, genetics, and climate models. Theoretically, this should be enough to stop us from flying blind. But knowledge doesn't automatically turn into action. Between the research paper and the law, between the model and the budget, there is a gap. And that gap is often very expensive. If the problem touches energy, transport, agriculture, industry, and consumption habits, we're not talking about a small green reform. We're talking about changing almost everything. Decarbonization, clean energy, trillions of dollars. Not on paper later, in reality now. It's easy to get discouraged. Too expensive, too complex, too slow. But there's another side to this. Renewable energy is no longer a fantasy. Electric vehicles aren't exotic anymore. Grid solutions and emissions monitoring are real tools we have right now. Despair can lie to you too. There is a massive difference between too late for a perfect outcome and too late for any improvement. Even partially preventing damage means real cities saved, real harvests protected, and real lives kept intact. Will we make it in time? No one knows. But if you're driving toward a cliff in the fog at night, that's not an argument to hit the gas. In this sense, the Younger Dryas is almost a moral lesson. It teaches us humility. It shows that the climate system is far more complex than human ego. When the past has already demonstrated such volatility, ignoring it today is simply foolish. Science isn't perfect either, and we need to say that out loud. Not to discredit it, but to be mature about it. The Younger Dryas itself has been politicized. Some use it to prove that any change is natural. Others use it as a pre-packaged apocalypse script. Both are too convenient. Science has to perform a difficult balancing act. It must find the middle ground between alarm and honesty. It needs to speak clearly enough so that society understands the gravity of the risk without turning data into a theatrical performance. It must be cautious enough not to promise absolute certainty where none exists, yet bold enough not to hide behind endless disclaimers when the evidence is overwhelming. It's a delicate task. Society loves simple answers, but reality is almost never simple.
This is especially evident when it comes to trust. If people begin to believe that scientists are merely serving an ideology, it's not just reputations that suffer. We lose the ability as a society to even agree on what constitutes a risk. Without trust, you can't carry out painful, expensive, long-term reforms. And without those reforms, politics slides into a short-term horizon. What will prices look like this year? Who's going to lose the next election? The climate doesn't care about election cycles. It doesn't adjust its schedule to fit the terms of cabinets or parliaments. That's why open data, acknowledging uncertainty, and using clear language aren't just minor details. They are part of a civilization's defense mechanism. If you lie about a threat, people stop trusting you. If you don't explain it clearly, they won't act. Both are equally dangerous. History has shown time and again that even relatively small climate shifts can snap entire societies. The Maya faced severe droughts. The Akkadians did too. During the late Roman period, it became colder and wetter. Harvests failed, migrations began, and all of this hit an empire already suffering from political exhaustion. Yet all those shifts were milder than the Younger Dryas. We're talking about a drop of maybe 1 or 2 degrees, or a 10 to 20% change in rainfall. That was enough to undermine the stability of massive societies. That's because civilizations almost never collapse for one reason. They collapse when climate stress hits a system already burdened by inequality, war, soil depletion, and debt. In these cases, climate is rarely the lone assassin, but it is often the brutal force multiplier.
It's tempting to think modern civilization is stronger, and in some ways it is. We have technology, global trade, satellites. If a harvest fails in one region, we can ship food from another. But interconnectivity is a double-edged sword. A blow to one node ripples quickly through the rest. The strength of the network and its weakness are often the same thing. What happens if the changes aren't local but synchronized? What if several of the world's breadbaskets face simultaneous droughts, heat waves, or floods? Humanity's grain reserves only cover a few months of consumption, not years. And then comes the fallout: famine, riots, migrations, and the total breakdown of trust. The Younger Dryas forces us to hold two truths in our heads at once. First, the climate is capable of breaking the world. Second, life and humanity are capable of enduring incredibly dark eras. Pure doom paralyzes us. Pure hope makes us complacent. We have to hold on to both. Civilization likely won't vanish overnight, but that doesn't mean the cost of survival will be acceptable. Surviving is not the same as enduring with dignity. You don't live as an abstract biological species. You live in a specific city, speaking a specific language among specific people.
The real questions are different. What will civilization look like afterward? What will be lost? Which regions will become uninhabitable? What will happen to the human spirit if we are forced to live in a state of permanent scarcity? The Younger Dryas doesn't answer these questions, but it makes it impossible to treat them lightly. It shows that the climate of the past wasn't just a backdrop, it was a force that sculpted history, sometimes gently, sometimes violently, sometimes in a way that gave birth to entirely new cultures. This leaves us with one more note, not just a warning, but a profound respect for human resilience. The people of the Younger Dryas survived. Their descendants built agriculture, cities, and states, the very world that allows us to ask these questions today. We are the children of survivors, but we are also the children of a rare streak of climatic good luck. The ultimate coming of age for modern civilization is to stop confusing the two. Our strength is real, but much of our complexity grew against an unusually mild background. We aren't all-powerful. We've just been lucky for a long time. The best reaction to the Younger Dryas isn't panic or cynicism, it's sobriety. We must recognize the scale of the risk without inventing fantasies. We must acknowledge the limits of our knowledge without using them as an excuse for inaction. We must recognize the value of time. The window hasn't slammed shut yet, but it won't stay open forever. The final question is this: what does a civilization do when it realizes it lives inside a fragile system it long mistook for eternal? Does it pretend nothing is happening? Does it argue until the very end? Or does it finally use the rare luxury of knowing what's coming? The Younger Dryas doesn't provide easy answers, but it does strip away one dangerous illusion: the illusion that stability is guaranteed. The rest is up to us. It depends on whether we treat this knowledge as a real warning or just another fascinating story about an ancient frost. Because this time, we're not just helpless witnesses, we're participants.
And for perhaps the first time in history, we are conscious enough of our role to actually see the curve ahead and steer away before we hit the most dangerous turn.